There we go. Science. Sorry about that. I thought my microphone was working for the last minute and a half, and it was not. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Fraggoth Reads. If my stream didn't just crash. It didn't. We're good. Um, I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggoth, and this week we'll be reading more of Endymion by one Dan the Man Simmons. So, last time, previously on, our protagonist, Raul and Endymion, tasked with rescuing Aenea, defeating the Pax, bringing Earth back to where it's supposed to be, and I guess getting Martin Silenus onto it. What else? Oh yeah, finding out what the Technocore is up to. And a bunch of other myriad easy tasks. Uh, has indeed absconded with Aenea when she steps out of the time tomb. The Sphinx, actually, I think she steps out of. So he manages to do this right under the noses of the Pax Swiss Guard. Or, yeah, Pax troopers and the Swiss Guard, who are super duper duper elite troopers with all the resources of the Vatican at their beck and call. It's a lot of dudes. It's like, I don't know, at least 2 ships in orbit plus, I don't know, some spectacular number of troops. Oh, thank you for tuning in, Severo. Hope your day's going well. Thanks for another read. Anytime. Well, anytime that I'm free. This week may get very dicey. I'm waiting on a phone call to confirm how dicey. Tentatively, Monday and Friday should be a lock, or they were 2 days ago, and then somebody started changing my schedule around. So we're gonna see. It wasn't me who changed my schedule around. So let's see. So their plan to basically get the jump on Aenea as soon as she comes out of the time tomb. The Pax, Federico de Soya, with the Pax military and the Vatican Swiss Guard. Their plan fails spectacularly. In their defense, it's not entirely their fault. When the Shrike shows up, things tend to get messy. And the Shrike does very much show up and proceeds to do all the things that we know and recognize of the Shrike, namely teleporting around, being in more than one place at once, and generally eviscerating everything that moves. Aenea's not happy with this. She's trying to keep him from keep the Shrike from massacring everything, because that's what it's good at, is massacring and slaughtering, maiming, injuring, doing horrible things too. That's its shtick, and it has very much done that to the Swiss Guard. Federico de Soya himself has almost but not quite lost a leg. He's also got some various puncture wounds. But the Swiss Guard in general are just decimated. It's wiped out. I don't even know. I think they're going to tell us how many how many people it wiped out, but I think they had somewhere on the order of thousands of troopers, and they have fewer than that now. So, right now, Raul and Endymion, Bettik, android Bettik, and Aenea have gotten to the ship, and they are hightailing it out of Hyperion, or away from Hyperion as quickly as they can. But first, a brief little interlude to see how Federico de Soya and co. are doing. Anytime, Jim Burke. That's what I'm here for. Chapter 16. Actually, it doesn't say chapter, so 16. How long have I been unconscious? Father Captain de Soya is gripping the tunic of the medic. 40 minutes, sir, said the medic, attempting to pull his shirt free. He does not succeed. Where am I? De Soya feels the pain now. It is very intense, centered in his leg, but radiating everywhere, but bearable. He ignores it. Aboard the St. Thomas Akira, father, sir. The troop ship? De Soya feels light-headed, unconnected. He looks down at his leg, now freed from its tourniquet. The lower leg is attached to the upper only by fragments of muscle and tissue. He realizes that Gregorius must have given him a painkiller, insufficient to block such a torrent of agony, but enough to give him this narcotic high. Damn! I'm afraid that the surgeons are going to amputate, says the medic. The surgeries are working overtime. You're next, though, sir. We've been carrying out triage, and... De Soya realizes that he is still gripping the young medic's tunic. He releases it. No. Excuse me, father, sir? You heard me. There'll be no surgery until I've met with the captain of the St. Thomas Akira. But, sir, father, sir, you'll die if you don't... I've died before, son. De Soya fights off a wave of giddiness. Did a sergeant bring me to the ship? Yes, sir. Is he still here? Yes, father, sir. The sergeant was receiving stitches for wounds that... Send him in here immediately. But, father, sir, your wounds require... De Soya looks at the young medic's rank. Ensign? Yes, sir. You saw the paper disky? De Soya had checked. The platinum template still hangs from the unbreakable chain around his neck. Yes, father, sir, that's what led us to prioritize your... Upon pain of execution. And worse, upon pain of excommunication. Shut up and send the sergeant in immediately, ensign. Gregorius is out of his battle armor, but is still huge. The father captain looks at the bandages and temporary dock packs on the big man's body and realizes that the sergeant had been badly wounded even as he was carrying De Soya out of danger. He makes a note to respond to that sometime. Not now. Sergeant! Gregorius snaps to attention. Bring the captain of this ship here immediately. Quickly, before I black out again. Quickly, before I black out again. There we go, much better. The captain of the St. Thomas Akira is a middle-aged Lucian, as short and powerful-looking as all Lucians. He is perfectly bald, but sports a neatly trimmed grey beard. Father Captain de Soya, I am Captain Lempriere. Things are very hectic now, sir. The surgeons assure me that you require immediate attention. How can I be of help? Tell me the situation, Captain. De Soya has not met the captain before, but they have spoken on tight beam. He hears the deference in the troop ship captain's voice. Out of the corner of his eye, De Soya sees Sergeant Gregorius excusing himself from the room. Stay, Sergeant. Captain, the situation. Lempriere clears his throat. Commander Barnes-Avon is dead. As far as we can tell, about half of the Swiss Guard in the Valley of the Time Tombs are also dead. Thousands of other casualties are pouring in. We have medics on the ground setting up mobile surgical centers, and we are ferrying the most severely wounded here for urgent care. The dead are being recovered and tagged for resurrection upon return to Renaissance Vector. Renaissance Vector? De Soya feels as if he is floating within the confined space of a surgical prep room. He is floating, within the confines of the gurney restraints. What the hell happened to the gravity, Captain? Lempriere smiles wanly. The containment field was damaged during the battle, sir. As for Renaissance Vector, well, it was our staging area, sir. Standing orders call for us to return there after the mission is completed. De Soya laughs, stopping only when he hears himself. It is not a totally sane laugh. Who says our mission? Who says our mission is completed, Captain? What battle are we talking about? Captain Lempriere glances at Sergeant Gregorius. The Swiss guard does not break his fixed, at-attention stare at the bulkhead. The support and covering craft in orbit were also decimated, sir. Decimated? The pain is making Soya angry. That means 1 in 10, Captain. Are 10% of the ship's personnel on the casualty list? No, sir, says Lempriere. More like 60%. Captain Ramirez of the Saint Bonaventure is dead, as is his executive officer. My own first is dead. Half the crew of the Saint Anthony have not answered roll. Are these ships damaged? Demands Father Captain Soya. He knows that he has only a minute or two of consciousness, and perhaps life, left. There was an explosion on the Saint Bonaventure. At least half of the compartments after the CIC vented to space. The drive is intact. Soya closes his eyes. As a torch ship captain himself, he knows that opening the craft to space is the penultimate nightmare. The ultimate nightmare was the implosion of the Hawking Corps itself, but at least that indignity would be instantaneous. Having a hull breached across so many of the ship's areas was, like this shattered leg, a slow, painful path to death. The St. Anthony? Damaged, but operable, sir. Captain Shotty is alive, and... The girl, demands Soya. Where is she? Black spots dance in the periphery of his vision, and the cloud of them grows. Girl? Says Lempriere. Sergeant Gregorius says something to the captain that Soya does not hear. There is a loud buzzing in his ears. Oh, yes, says Lempriere. The acquisition objective. Evidently, a ship retrieved her from the surface and is accelerating towards C+ translation. A ship? Soya fights away unconscious. What? Soya fights away unconscious with a sheer... Okay, it must be unconsciousness, and they forgot the nest, whatever. A ship? Soya fights away unconsciousness with a sheer effort of will. Where the hell did his ship come from? Gregorius speaks without breaking his staring match with the bulkhead. From the planet, sir. From Hyperion. During the Charlie Fawkes event, the ship skipped through the atmosphere, set down at the castle, Kronos Keep, sir, and plucked the kid and whoever was flying her. Flying her? Interrupts Soya. It is hard to hear through the growing buzz. Some sort of one-person EMV, says the sergeant, although why it works the tech boffins don't know. Anyway, this ship got past the COP during the carnage, and is spinning up to translation. Carnage, repeats Soya stupidly. He realizes that he is drooling. He wipes his chin with the back of his hand, trying not to look down at the remnants of his leg as he does so. Carnage. What caused it? Who were we fighting? We don't know, sir, answers Lempriere. It was like the old days, Hegemony 4 stage, when the jump troops came in by Farcaster portal, sir. I mean, thousands of armored things appeared everywhere at the same second, sir. I mean, the battle only lasted 5 minutes. There were thousands of them, and then they were gone. Soya is straining to hear this through the gathering darkness and the roaring in his ears, but the words make no sense. Thousands? Of what? Gone where? Gregorius steps forward and looks down at the Father Captain. Not thousands, sir. Just one. The Shrike. That's a legend, begins Lempriere. Just the Shrike, continues the huge black man, ignoring the troopship captain. It killed most of the Swiss Guard and half the regular Pax troops on Equus, downed all of the Scorpion fighters, took 2 tilt ships over the line out of business, killed everyone aboard the C3 ship, left his calling card here, and was gone in under 30 seconds. Total. All the rest was our guys shooting each other in panic. The Shrike. Nonsense, shouts Lempriere, his bare scalp growing red with agitation. That's a fantasy, a tall tale, and a heresy at that. Whatever struck us today was no... Shut up, says Soya. He feels as if he is looking and talking down a long, dark tunnel. Whatever he has to say, he must say quickly. Listen, Captain Lempriere, on my authority, on papal authority, authorize Captain Sati to take the survivors of the St. Bonaventure aboard the St. Anthony to round out the crew. Order Sati to follow the girl, the spacecraft bearing the girl. Follow it to spin up, to fix its translation coordinates, and to follow. But Father Captain, begins Lempriere. Listen, shouts de Soya over the waterfall noise in his ears. He can no longer see anything but dancing spots. Listen, order Captain Sati to follow that ship anywhere, even if it takes a lifetime, and to capture the girl. That is his prime and total objective. Directive, sorry. Capture the girl and return her to Pachem. Gregorius? Yes, sir. Don't let them operate on me, Sergeant. Is my courier ship still intact? The Raphael? Yes, sir. It was empty during the battle and the Shrike didn't touch it. Is Hiroshi, my dropship pilot, still around? No, sir. He was killed. De Soya can barely hear the sergeant's booming voice over the louder booming. Requisition a pilot and shuttle, Sergeant. Get me, you, and the rest of your squad. Just 2 men now, sir. Listen, get the 4 of us to the Raphael. The ship will know what to do. Tell it that we are going to follow the girl, the ship, and the St. Anthony. Wherever those ships go, we go. Sergeant? Yes, Father Captain. You and your men are born again, aren't you? Yes, Father Captain. Well, prepare to be born again for real, Sergeant. But your leg, says Captain Lempriere from very, very far away. His voice Doppler shifts as it recedes. I'll be reunited with it when I'm resurrected, mutters Father Captain de Soya. He wants to close his eyes to say a prayer now, but he does not have to close his eyes to shut out the light. The darkness around him is absolute. Into that roaring and buzzing, not knowing if anyone can hear him or if he is really speaking, he says, Quickly, Sergeant. Now. "17. Now, writing this so many years later, I had thought it would be difficult to remember Aenea as a child. It is not. My memories are so full of later years, later images, rich sunlight on the woman's body as we floated among the branches of the orbital forest, the first time we made love in zero gravity, strolling with her along the hangway walkways of Swan Kung Su with the rose-red cliffs of Huashan catching the rich light above us, that I had worried that those earlier memories would be too insubstantial. They are not. Nor have I given in to the impulse to leap ahead to the later years, despite my fear that this narrative will be interrupted at any second with the quantum mechanical hiss of Schrodinger's poison gas. I will write what I can write. Fate will determine the ending point of this narrative. Bettik led the way up the spiral staircase to the room with the piano as we roared up into space. The containment field kept the gravity constant, despite the wild acceleration, but still there was a wild sense of exhilaration in me, although perhaps it was just the aftermath of so much adrenaline in so little time. The child was dirty, disheveled, and still upset. "I want to see where we are," she said. "Please." The ship complied by turning the wall beyond the hollow pit into a window. The continent of Equus receded below, the face of the horse obscured by red dust cloud. To the north, where clouds covered the pole, the limb of Hyperion arced into a distinct curve. Within a minute, the entire world was a globe, 2 of the 3 continents visible beneath scattered cloud, the great South Sea breathtaking blue, while the Nine-Tails archipelago was surrounded by the green of shallows, and then the world shrank, became a blue and red-white sphere, and fell behind. Blue and red and white sphere, and fell behind. We were leaving in a hurry. "Where are the torch ships?" I asked the android. "They should have challenged us by now, or blown us to bits." "The ship and I were monitoring their wideband channels," said Bettik. "They were preoccupied." "I don't understand," I said, pacing the rim of the hollow pit, too agitated to sit in the deep cushions. "That battle, who—"
"The Shrike," said Aenea, and really looked at me for the first time. "Mother and I hoped it would not happen like that, but it did. I am so sorry. So terribly sorry."
The girl's eyes were bright. Despite the mud and grit on her cheek, I could see the fairness of her complexion.
"So you're Endymion, like the poem," she said.
"Poem?" I said. "I don't know about a poem. It's Endymion, like the old city." She smiled.
"I only know the poem because my father wrote it. How fitting of Uncle Martin to choose a hero with such a name."
I squirmed at hearing the word hero. This whole endeavor was turning out to be absurd enough without that. The girl held out her small hand.
"Aenea," she said, "but I guess you know that."
Her fingers were cool in my palm. "The old poet said that you had changed your name a few times." Her smile lingered.
"And will again, I wager."
She withdrew her hand and then offered it to the android.
"Aenea, Orphan of Time."
Bettik shook her hand more gracefully than I had, bowed deeply, and introduced himself.
"I am at your service, Lamia," he said.
She shook her head.
"My mother was Lamia. I'm just Aenea."
She noticed my change in expression.
"You know of my mother?"
"She is famous," I said, blushing slightly for some reason. "All of the Hyperion pilgrims are. Legendary, actually. There is this poem, epic oral tale, actually."
Aenea laughed. "Oh, God! Uncle Martin finished his damn cantos."
I admit that I was shocked. My face must have shown it. I'm glad I was not playing poker this particular morning.
"Sorry," said Aenea. "Obviously the old fart's scribblings have become some sort of priceless cultural heritage. He's still alive? Uncle Martin, I mean."
Yes, Aenea," said Bettik.
"I have had the privilege of serving your uncle for over a century."
The girl made a face.
"You must be a saint, Bettik. You must be a saint, Bettik."
"Bettik, Aenea," he said, "and no, I am no saint, merely an admirer and long acquaintance of your uncle."
Aenea nodded. "I met a few androids when we would fly up from Jacktown to visit Uncle Martin in the Poet's City, but not you. More than a century, you say. What year is it?"
I told her.
"Well, we got that part right at least," she said, and fell silent, staring at the whole of the receding world.
Hyperion was only a spark now. "You've really come from the past?" I said. It was a stupid question, but I wasn't feeling especially bright that morning.
Aenea nodded. "Uncle Martin must have told you."
"Yes, you're fleeing the packs." She looked up. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears.
"The packs? Is that what they call it?"
I blinked at that. The thought of someone being unfamiliar with the concept of the packs shook me. This was real. "Yes," I said.
"So the church does run everything now?"
"Well, in a way," I said. I explained the role of the church in the complex entity that was the Pax.
"They run everything," concluded Aenea. "We thought it might go that way. My dreams got that right, too."
"Your dreams?"
"Never mind," said Aenea.
She stood, looked around the room, and walked to the Steinway. Her fingers picked out a few notes on the keyboard.
"And this is the consul's ship."
"Yes," said the ship, "although I have only vague memories of the gentleman. Did you know him?" Aenea smiled, her fingers still trailing across the keys.
"No, my mother did. She gave him a present of that."
She pointed to the sand-covered hawking mat where it lay near the staircase.
"When he left Hyperion after the fall, he was going back to the web. He didn't return during my time."
"He never did," said the ship. "As I say, my memories have been damaged, but I am sure that he died somewhere there."
The ship's soft voice changed, became more businesslike. "We were hailed upon leaving the atmosphere, but have not been challenged or pursued since then. We have cleared cislunar space and will be out of Hyperion's critical gravity well within 10 minutes. I need to set the course for spin-up. Instructions, please." I looked at the girl. "The Ousters? That's where the old poet said you'd want to go." "I changed my mind," said Aenea. "What's the nearest inhabited world, ship?" "Parvati, 1.28 parsecs, 6.5 days ship time transit, 3 months time debt." "Was Parvati part of the web?" asked the girl. Bettik answered, "No, not at the time of the fall." "What's the nearest old web world traveling from Parvati?" said Aenea. "Renaissance Vector," said the ship immediately. "It is an additional 10 days ship time, 5 months time debt." I was frowning. "I don't know," I said. "The hunters, off-worlders I used to work for usually came from Renaissance Vector. It's a big Pax world. Busy. Lots of ships and troops there, I think." "But it's the closest web world?" said Aenea. "It used to have forecasters." "Yes," said the ship and Bettik at the same moment. "Set course for Renaissance Vector by way of Parvati's system," said Aenea. It would be a ship time day and 2 weeks of time debt quicker to jump directly to Renaissance Vector, if that is our destination," advised the ship. "I know," said Aenea, "but I want to go by way of Parvati's system." She must have seen the question in my eyes, for she said, "They'll be following us, and I don't want them to know the real destination when we spin up out of this system." "They are not in pursuit now," said Bettik. "I know," said Aenea, "but they will be in a few hours. Then and for the rest of my life." She looked back at the holopit as if the ship's persona resided there. "Carry out the command, please." The stars shifted on the holo-display as the ship obeyed. 27 minutes to translation point for Parvati system, it said. "Still no challenge or pursuit, although the torch ship St. Anthony is underway, as is the troop ship." "What about the other torch ship?" I said. The St. Bonaventure." "Common band communications traffic and sensors show that it is open to space and emitting distress signals," said the ship. "The St. Anthony is responding." "My God," I whispered. "What was it? An ouster attack?" The girl shook her head and walked away from the piano. "Just the Shrike. My father warned me." She fell silent. "The Shrike?" It was the android who spoke. "To my knowledge, in legend and the old records, the creature called the Shrike never left Hyperion, usually staying in the area within a few hundred kilometers around the time tombs." Aenea dropped back into the cushions. Her eyes were still red, and she looked tired. "Yeah, well, he's wandering farther afield now, I'm afraid. And if father is right, it's just the beginning." "The Shrike hasn't been seen or heard from for almost 300 years, I said. The girl nodded, distracted. "I know. Not since the tombs opened right before the fall." She looked up at the android. "Gosh, I'm starved and filthy." "I will help the ship prepare lunch," said Bettik. "There are showers upstairs in the master bedroom and on the fugue deck below us," he said. "Also a bath in the master bedroom." "That's where I'm headed," said the girl. "I'll be down before we make the quantum jump. See you in 20 minutes. On her way to the stairs, she stopped and took my hand again. "Raul and Endymion, I'm sorry if I seem ungrateful. Thank you for risking your life for me. Thank you for coming with me on this trip. Thank you for getting into something so big and complicated that neither one of us can imagine where we're going to end up." I'm going to reread that so the sentences actually work and I'm not blown away by line breaks. It's kind of an important paragraph speech. On her way to the stairs, she stopped and took my hand again. "Raul and Endymion, I'm sorry if I seem ungrateful. Thank you for risking your life for me. Thank you for coming with me on this trip. Thank you for getting into something so big and complicated that neither one of us can imagine where we're going to end up." "You're welcome," I said stupidly. The child grinned at me. You need a shower too, friend. Someday we'll take it together, but right now I think you should use the one on the fugue deck.
Blinking, not knowing what to think, I watched her bounce up the stairs. "18. Father Captain de Soya awakens in a resurrection creche." What? Creshage? Is that a thing? It's maybe added letters, I don't know. Happy New Year to you too, optical antenna, as I scratch my head. So, I've mentioned this before, and it was particularly apparent during the book Armor by John Stakely. You don't really realize how much your brain just fills in blanks a lot when you're reading on your own, but when you're reading aloud, you see all the weird editing stuff that... You see all the weird stuff that got past an editor. Now, okay, bearing in mind, this book is... Okay, this is the omnibus edition. How long is the actual book itself? It's hefty. Yeah, it's like 430 pages or something for just the first volume. But, like, even then. Maybe a creshage is a thing. 18. Father Captain de Soya awakens in a resurrection crash aboard the Raphael. He had been allowed to name the Archangel-class ship. Archangel-class ship. Raphael is the Archangel in charge of finding lost loves. He has been reborn only twice before, but each time he has been greeted formally and given the ceremonial sip of sacramental wine from the cup, and then the customary glass of orange juice. There have been resurrection experts there to talk to him, explain things to him, until his befuddled mind begins to work again. This time there are only the claustrophobic, curved walls of the resurrection creche. Telltales blink and readouts share lines of print and symbols. De Soya cannot read yet. He feels lucky to be thinking at all. He sits up and dangles his legs over the edge of the resurrection bed. My legs. I have 2 of them. He is naked, of course, his skin pink and gleaming in the strange, parboiled wetness of the resurrection tank, and now he feels his ribs, his abdomen, his left leg, all the places slashed and ruined by the demon. He is perfect. There is no sign of the terrible wound that had separated his leg from his body. Raphael? Yes, Father Captain. The voice is angelic, which is to say, totally devoid of sexual identity. De Soya finds it soothing. Where are we? Parvati system, Father Captain. The others? De Soya has only the foggiest memory of Sergeant Gregorius and his 2 surviving squad members. No memory of boarding the courier ship with them. Being awakened as we speak, Father Captain. Just how much time has passed? Just a bit less than 4 days since the sergeant brought you aboard, Father Captain. The enhanced jump was carried out within the hour of your installation in the resurrection creche. We have been station-keeping 10 AUs from the world of Parvati, as per your instruction via Sergeant Gregorius, for the 3 days of your resurrection. Happy New Year to you too, CE39! Wow, we are getting quite a crowd today. De Soya nods his understanding. Even that slight motion is painful. Every cell in his body aches from resurrection. But the pain is a healthy ache, unlike the terrible pain of his wounds. Have you contacted the Pax authorities on Parvati? No, Father Captain. Good. Parvati had been a remote colony world during the days of the hegemony. Now it is a remote Pax colony. It holds no interstellar spacecraft, Pax military or mercantilus. Mercantilus? I'm not sure how to... I should look up if there's a defined pronunciation of that. Mercantilus. Anyway, they're the mercantile branch. Pax military or mercantilus, and only a small military contingent and a few crude interplanetary ships. If the girl was going to be captured in this system, the Raphael would have to do the capturing. "Update on the girl's ship?" he says. "The unidentified spacecraft spun up 2 hours and 18 minutes before we did," said Raphael. "The translation coordinates were undoubtedly for Parvati's system. Arrival time for the unidentified ship is approximately 2 months, 3 weeks, 2 days, and 17 hours. "Thank you," says de Soya. "When Gregorius and the others are revived and dressed, have them meet me in the Situation Room." "Yes, Father Captain." "Thank you," he says again. He thinks, 2 months, 3 weeks, 2 days. Mother of mercy, what am I going to do for almost 3 months in this backwater system? Perhaps he had not thought through this clearly. Certainly he had been distracted by trauma, pain, and drugs. But the next nearest packed system was Renaissance Vector, which was 10 days ship time travel from Parvati, 5 months time debt, 3.5 days and 2 months after the girl's ship would arrive from Hyperion's system. No, he might not have been thinking clearly. He is not now, he realizes. But he had made the right decision. Better to come here and think things over. "I could jump to Pacem, ask for instructions directly from Pax Command, from the Pope even, recuperate for 2.5 months and jump back here with time to spare." De Soya shakes his head, grimaces from the discomfort of doing so. He has his instructions. Capture the girl and return her to Pacem. Returning to the Vatican world would be only an admission of failure. Perhaps they would send someone else. During the pre-flight briefing, Captain Margaret Wu had made it clear that the Raphael was unique, the only armed 6-person Archangel-class courier ship in existence, and although another might have come online in the months of time debt that have elapsed since he left Pacem, there is little sense in returning now. If Raphael is still the only armed Archangel, all de Soya could do would be to add 2 more troopers to the ship's roster. Death and resurrection are not to be taken lightly. That precept had been driven home time and again in de Soya's catechism when he was growing up. Just because the sacrament exists and is offered to the faithful does not mean it should be exercised without great solemnity and restraint. Happy New Year, Fraggoth. Come across your channel recently and have been loving your book reads. Right now, I'm working my way through your Dark Forest playlist from Shishin Lu. Keep up the good work. Thank you very much, CE39. It's just far enough that I can't tell. Yes, CE39. Anytime. Thank you very much. Happy to see you tuning in. "No, I'll talk to Gregorius and the others and figure things out here. We can make our plans, then use the cryogenic fugue cubbies to wait the last couple of months. When the girl's ship arrives, the St. Anthony will be in hot pursuit. Between the torch ship and Raphael, we should be able to interdict the ship, board her, and retrieve the girl without problem." Logically, this all makes sense to de Soya's aching brain, but another part of his mind is whispering, "Without problem. This is what you thought about the Hyperion mission." Father Captain de Soya groans, lifts himself down from the resurrection couch, and pads off in search of a shower, hot coffee, and some clothes. I may wind up getting interrupted by a phone call later. Hopefully we won't, but we'll see. I have a minor. There might be an altercation. Verbal. Nothing you guys will hear. But if I say, "Oh shit, phone call," and I'm on mute and silent for a while. 19. I knew little about the principles of the Hawking Drive when I first experienced it years ago. I know little more about it now. The fact that it was essentially, if accidentally, the brainchild of someone who lived in the 20th century, Christian era, boggled my mind then as it does now, but not nearly as much as the experience itself. We met in the library, formerly known as the navigation level, the ship informed us, a few minutes before translation to C+ speeds. I was dressed in my spare set of clothes, and my hair was wet, as was Aenea's. The child wore only a thick robe, which she must have found in the consul's closet, because the garment was far too large for her. She looked even younger than her 12 years, swallowed as she was in all those yards of terry cloth. Shouldn't we be getting to the cryogenic fugue couches? I asked.
Why? Said Aenea. Don't you want to see the fun?
I frowned. All the off-world hunters and military instructors I had spoken to had spent their C-plus time in fugue. That's the way humans had always spent their time between the stars. Something about the effect of the Hawking field on the body and mind. I had images of hallucinations, waking nightmares, and unspeakable pain. I said as much while trying to sound calm about it. C-plus, of course, means faster than C, or greater than C, as in the speed of light.
Mother and Uncle Martin told me that C+ can be endured, said the girl, even enjoyed. It just takes some getting used to.
And this ship was modified by ousters to make it easier, said A. Bettik. Aenea and I were sitting at the low glass table in the middle of the library area. The android stood to one side. Try as I might to treat him as an equal, A. Bettik insisted on acting like a servant. I resolved to quit being an egalitarian horse's ass about it and to let him act any way he wanted. Indeed, said the ship, the modifications included an enhanced containment field capability, which makes the side effects of C+ travel much less disagreeable. No, you do not want to hear the drama. It's kind of petty. It could potentially be petty. I don't know. We'll find out. Professional shenanigans. What exactly are the side effects? I asked, not willing to show the full extent of my naivete, but also not willing to suffer if I didn't have to. The android, the girl, and I looked at each other. I have traveled between the stars in centuries past, A. Bettik said at last, but I was always in fugue. In storage, actually. We androids were shipped in cargo holds, stacked like frozen sides of beef, I am told. Now the girl and I looked at each other, embarrassed to meet the blue-skinned man's gaze. The ship made a noise that sounded remarkably like someone clearing his throat. Actually, it said, from my observations of human passengers, which, I must say, is suspect because your memory is hazy, the girl and I said in unison. We looked at each other again and laughed.
Sorry, ship, said Aenea. Go on.
I was just going to say that from my observations, the primary effect of the C+ environment on humans is some visual confusion, mental depression brought about by the field, and simple boredom. I believe that cryogenic fugue was developed for the long voyages and is used as a convenience for shorter trips such as this. And your, ouster modifications ameliorate these side effects? I said. They are designed to, replied the ship. All except boredom, of course. That is a peculiarly human phenomenon, and I do not believe that a cure has been found. There was a moment of silence, and then the ship said, We will reach the translation point in 2 minutes 10 seconds. All systems are functioning optimally. Still no pursuit, although the St. Anthony is tracking us on its long-range detectors. Aenea stood up.
Let's go down and watch the shift to C+.
Go down and watch? I said. Where? The hollow pit? No, called the girl from the stairway. From outside. The spaceship had a balcony. I hadn't known that. One could stand outside on it even while the ship was hurtling through space, preparing to translate to C+ pseudo-velocities. I hadn't known that, and if I had, I would not have believed it.
Extend the balcony, please,
the girl had said to the ship, and the ship had extended the balcony, the sineway moving out with it, and we'd walked through the open archway into space. Well, not really into space, of course. Even I, the provincial shepherd, knew that our eardrums would have exploded, our eyes burst, and our blood boiled in our bodies if we had stepped into hard vacuum. But it looked as if we were walking out into hard vacuum. Is this safe? I asked, leaning against the railing. Hyperion was a star-sized speck behind us, Hyperion's star a blazing sun to port, but the plasma tail of our fusion drive, tens of clicks long, gave the impression that we were perched precariously on a tall blue pillar. The effect was a definite inducement to acrophobia, as the illusion of standing unprotected in space created something akin to agoraphobia. I had not known until that instant that I was susceptible to any phobia.
If the containment field fails for a second, said A. Bettik, under this G-load and velocity, we will die immediately. It matters little if we are inside or outside the ship.
Radiation? I said.
The field deflects cosmic and harmful solar radiation, of course, said the android, and opaques the view of Hyperion's sun so that we do not go blind when we stare at it. Other than that, it allows the visible spectrum through quite nicely.
Yes, I said, not convinced. I stepped back from the railing.
30 seconds to translation, said the ship.
Even out here, its voice seemed to emanate from mid-air. Aenea sat at the piano bench and began playing. I did not recognize the tune, but it sounded classical, something from the 26th century, perhaps. I guessed that I had expected the ship to speak again prior to the actual moment of translation, intone a final countdown or something, but there was no announcement. Suddenly, the hawking drive took over from the fusion drive. There was a momentary hum, which seemed to come from my bones. A terrible vertigo flooded over me and through me. It felt as if I were being turned inside out, painlessly but relentlessly, and then the sensation was gone before I could really comprehend it. Space was also gone. By space, I mean the scene that I had been viewing less than a second earlier. Hyperion's brilliant sun, the receding disk of the planet itself, the bright glare along the hull of the ship, the few bright stars visible through that glare, even the pillar of blue flame upon which we had been perched. All gone. In its place was... it is hard to describe. The ship was still there, looming above and below us. The balcony upon which we stood still seemed substantial, but there seemed to be no light striking any part of it. I realize how absurd that sounds even as I write the words. There must be reflected light for anything to be seen, but the effect was truly as if part of my eyes had ceased working, and while they registered the shape and mass of the ship, light seemed to be missing. Beyond the ship, the universe had contracted into a blue sphere near the bow and a red sphere behind the fins at the stern. I knew enough basic science to have expected a Doppler effect, but this was a false effect, since we had not been anywhere near the speed of light until translation to C+, and were now far beyond it within the Hawking fold. Nonetheless, the blue and red circles of light, I could make out stars clustered in both spheres if I stared hard enough, now migrated farther to the bow and stern, shrinking to tiny dots of color. In between, filling the vast field of vision, there was... nothing. By that, I do not mean blackness or darkness. I mean void. I mean the sense of sickening non-sight one has when trying to look into a blind spot. I mean a nothing so intense that the vertigo it induced almost immediately changed to nausea within me, racking my system as violently as the transitory sense of being pulled inside out had seconds before. "My God!" I managed to say, gripping the rail tightly and squeezing my eyes shut. It did not help. The void was there as well. I understood at that second why interstellar voyages always opted for cryogenic fugue. Incredibly, unbelievably, Aenea continued playing the piano. The notes were clear, crystalline, as if unmodified by any connecting medium. Even with my eyes closed, I could see A. Bettik standing by the door, blue face raised to the void. No, I realized he was no longer blue. Colors did not exist here, nor did black, white, or gray. I wondered if humans who had been blind since birth dreamed of light and colors in this mad way. "Compensating," said the ship, and its voice had the same crystalline quality as Aenea's piano notes. Suddenly, the void collapsed in on itself, vision returned, and the spheres of red and blue returned fore and aft. Within seconds, the blue sphere from the stern migrated along the ship like a donut passing over a writing stylus. It merged with the red sphere at the bow, and without warning, colored geometries burst
forth. Oh, it didn't say burst forth. My brain just lost track of the sentence. It merged with the red sphere at the bow, and without warning, colored geometries burst from the forward sphere like flying creatures emerging from an egg. I say colored geometries, but this does nothing to share the complex reality. Fractal-generated shapes pulsed and coiled and twisted through what had been the void. Spiral forms, spiked with their own sub-geometries, curled in on themselves, spitting smaller forms of the same cobalt and blood-red brilliance. Yellow ovoids became pulsar-precise explosions of light. Mauve and indigo mauve and indigo helixes, looking like the universe's DNA, spiraled past us. I could hear these colors like distant thunder, like the pounding of surf just below the horizon. I realized that my jaw was hanging slack. I turned away from the railing and tried to concentrate on the girl and android. The colors of the fractal universe played across them. Aenea still played softly, her fingers moving across keys even as she looked up at me and the fractal heavens beyond me. "Maybe we should go inside," I said, hearing each word in my own voice hanging separately in the air like icicles along a branch. "Fascinating," said Bettik, arms still folded, his gaze on the tunnel of forms surrounding us. His skin was blue again. Aenea stopped playing. Perhaps sensing my vertigo and terror for the first time, she rose, took my hand, and led me inside the ship. The balcony followed us in. The hull reformed. I was able to breathe again. "We have 6 days," the girl said. We were sitting in the hollow pit because the cushions were comfortable there. We had eaten, and Bettik had fetched us cold fruit drinks from the refrigerator drawers. My hand shook only slightly as we sat and talked. 6 days, 9 hours, and 27 minutes, said the ship. Aenea looked up at the bulkhead. "Ship, you can stay quiet for a while unless there's something vital you have to say or we have a question for you." "Yes, Aenea," said the ship. 6 days, repeated the girl. "We have to get ready." I sipped my drink. Ready for what? I think they'll be there waiting for us. We have to come up with a way to get through Parvati's system and onto Renaissance Vector without their stopping us. I considered the child. She looked tired. Her hair was still straggly from the shower. With all of the Canto's talk of the one who teaches, I had expected someone extraordinary, a young messiah in a toga, a prodigy delivering cryptic utterances. But the only thing extraordinary about this young person was the powerful clarity of her dark eyes. Oh, one sec. False alarm. Where were we? Yes, here we go. I considered the child. She looked tired. Her hair was still straggly from the shower. With all of the Canto's talk of the one who teaches, I had expected someone extraordinary, a young messiah in a toga, a prodigy delivering cryptic utterances. But the only thing extraordinary about this young person was the powerful clarity of her dark eyes. How could they be waiting for us? I said. The fat line hasn't worked for centuries. The Pax ships behind us can't call ahead as they could in your time. Aenea shook her head. No, the fat line had fallen before I was born. Remember, my mother was pregnant with me during the fall. She looked at Bettik. The android was drinking juice, but he had not chosen to sit down. I'm sorry I don't remember you. As I said, I used to visit the Poet City and thought I knew all of the androids. He bowed his head slightly. No reason for you to remember me, Aenea. I had left the Poet City even before your mother's pilgrimage. My siblings and I were working along the Huli River and on the Sea of Grass then. After the fall, we left service and lived alone in different places. I see, she said. There was a lot of craziness after the fall. I remember. There was a lot of craziness after the fall. I remember. Androids would have been in danger west of the Bridle Range. I caught her gaze. No, seriously, how could someone be waiting for us at Parvati? They can't outrun us. We got to quantum velocity first, so the best they can do is translate into Parvati space an hour or two after us. I know, said Aenea, but I still think that somehow they'll be waiting. We have to come up with a way this unarmed ship can outrun or outmaneuver a warship. We talked for several more minutes, but none of us, not even the ship when queried, had a clever idea. All the time we were talking, I was observing the girl, the way her lips turned up slightly in a smile when she was thinking, the slight furrow in her brow when she spoke earnestly, how soft her voice was. I understood why Martin Silenus wanted her protected from harm. I wonder why the old poet didn't call us before we left the system, I mused aloud. He must have wanted to talk to you. Aenea ran her fingers through her hair like a comb. Uncle Martin would never greet me via tight beam or hollow. We were agreed that we would speak after this trip was over. I looked at her. So you two planned the whole thing? I mean, your getaway, the hawking mat, everything? She smiled again at the thought. My mother and I planned the essential details. After she died, Uncle Martin and I discussed the plan. He saw me off to the Sphinx this morning. This morning? I said, confused. Then I understood. It's been a long day for me, the girl said ruefully. I took a few steps this morning and covered half the time that humans have been on Hyperion. Everyone I knew, except Uncle Martin, must be dead. Not necessarily, I said. The Pax arrived not long after you disappeared, so many of your friends and family could have accepted the cross. They would still be here. Accepted the cross, repeated the girl, and shivered slightly. I don't have any family. My mother was my only real family, and I sort of doubt that many of my friends or my mother's friends would have accepted the cross. We stared at each other in silence for a moment, and I realized how exotic this young creature was. Most of the historical events on Hyperion I was familiar with had not yet occurred when this girl had taken her step into the Sphinx this morning. So, anyway, she said, we didn't plan things down to the detail of the hawking mat. We didn't know if the consul's ship would return with it, of course. But Mother and I did plan to use the labyrinth if the Valley of the Tombs was off limits. That worked out all right, and we hoped that the consul's ship would be here to get me off planet. Tell me about your time, I said. Aenea shook her head. I will, she said, but not now. You know about my era. It's history and legends to you. I don't know anything about your time, except for my dreams, so tell me about the present. How wide is it? How deep is it? How much is mine to keep? I did not recognize the allusion of the last questions, but I began telling her about the Pax, about the great cathedral in St. Joseph and the... St. Joseph? She said. Where's that? You used to call it Keats, I said. The capital. It was also called Jacktown. Ah, she said, settling back into the cushions, the glass of fruit juice balanced in her slender fingers. They changed the heathen name. Well, my father wouldn't mind. It was the second time she had mentioned her father. I assumed she was speaking of the Keats cybrid, but I did not stop to ask her about that. Yes, I said, many of the old cities and landmarks were renamed when Hyperion joined the Pax 2 centuries ago. There was talk of renaming the world itself, but the old name stuck. Anyway, the Pax does not govern directly, but the military brought order to I went on for some time, filling her in on details of technology, culture, language, and government. I described what I had heard, read, and watched of life on more advanced Pax worlds, including the glories of Pacem. Gee, she said when I paused, things really haven't changed all that much. It sounds as if technology is sort of stuck, still not caught up to hegemony days. Well, I said, the Pax is partly responsible for that. The Church prohibits thinking machines, true AIs, and its emphasis is on human and spiritual development rather than technological advancement. Aenea nodded. Sure, but you'd think they would have caught up to World Web levels in 2.5 centuries. I mean, it's like a Dark Ages or something. I smiled as I realized that I was taking offense, being annoyed at criticism of the Pax society I had chosen not to join. Not really, I said. Remember, the largest change has been the granting of virtual immortality. Because of that, the population growth is regulated carefully, and there is less incentive to change exterior things. Most born-again Christians consider themselves to be in this life for the long haul, many centuries at least, and millennia with luck, so they aren't in a hurry to change things. Aenea regarded me carefully. So the cruciform resurrection stuff really works? Oh, yes. Then why haven't you accepted the cross? For the third time in recent days, I was at a loss to explain. I shrugged. Perversity, I guess. I'm stubborn. Also, a lot of people like me stay away from it when we're young. We all plan to live forever, right? And then convert when age starts setting in. Will you? Her dark eyes were piercing. I stopped myself from shrugging again, but the gesture of my hand was the equivalent. I don't know, I said. I had not told her yet about my execution and subsequent resurrection with Martin Silenus. I don't know, I said again. Bettik stepped into the hollow pit circle. I thought I might mention that we have stocked the ship with an ample supply of ice cream, in several flavors. Could I interest either of you in some? I formed a phrase reminding the android that he was not a servant on this voyage, but before I could speak, Aenea cried, Yes! Chocolate! Bettik nodded, smiled, and turned in my direction. Endymion? It had been a long day, hawking mat voyages through the labyrinth, dust storms, carnage. She said it was the Shrike, and my first off-world trip. Quite a day. Chocolate, I said. Yes, definitely chocolate. Let's see. Severo says, wait, wasn't there a classic sci-fi story that also was about people going crazy if they stayed awake during warp? The Jaunt by Stephen King. I have not read that one. I'll have to get around to that. There's a couple good books, stories, and settings that involve the perils of going faster than light or using wormholes or warp speed. Hyperion happens to be one of them. Warhammer 40k, infamously, the quote, faster than light travel, unquote, for much of the setting is basically punching a hole into warp space, which is a realm where of ideas made form, and unfortunately that includes the bad ones, and the bad ideas made form are very nasty. But by the grace of the God Emperor do you go through. Of course, it's not necessarily reliable faster than light in that setting. It's like you can end up there before you're supposed to, or well after. It's unpredictable and unreliable because it has like eddies and currents and whatnot. What was another one? There was one maybe by William Gibson that had going crazy as a result of warp exposure. And of course, what's that movie with Sam Neill and guy who played Morpheus in The Matrix. Oh my gosh. Why can't I remember his name? That's embarrassing. Lawrence.
Oh my god, I'm losing my mind. Getting old sucks. Anyway, what is that movie called? Event Horizon. Event Horizon is another example of warp making people go crazy. I'll have to read that Stephen King one. Yeah, no, I feel you. I feel you. It takes me a while to shift mental gears sometimes. But yeah, it's a fairly I wouldn't say it's a terribly common trope, but it's common enough that it pops up in some pretty interesting ways and is varied enough in its interpretation and utilization of the warp is there. You can go faster than light, but at what cost? Even Star Trek eventually went that route, being like, oh, if you go warp speed too fast, it bad for universe, don't do. Which, of course, they would ignore whenever it was plot convenient, but them's the breaks. That's one of the perils of having a TV show in which you have an episodic structure, and eventually, well, why can't we go faster? And you have to keep track of however much continuity. We don't speak of anything like post-Voyager here. We barely speak of Voyager if we can avoid it. I'm not that much of an elitist. I'll watch nearly anything, but I will admit that most of the stuff, Voyager, like, post Deep Space Nine is kind of disappointing. Mostly because like Voyager, for instance, had a lot of potential to be a lot of fun, and occasionally is, but then kind of is hamstrung by either executive meddling or just not working with its setup all that well. Anyway, back to reading. 20. The surviving members of Sergeant Gregorius's squad are Corporal Bassin Key and Lancer Aranjual Gaspa. Oh, that is a continuing name. The surviving members of Sergeant Gregorius's squad are Corporal Bassin Key and Lancer Aranval Gaspa K.T. Rettig. Key is a small man, compact and quick in both reflexes and intelligence, while Rettig is tall, almost as tall as the giant Gregorius, but as thin as the sergeant is massive. Rettig is from the Lambert Ring territories and has the radiation scars, skeletal frame, and independent bent so stereotypical of stroiders. As in asteroiders. De Soya has learned that the man has never set foot on a full-sized, full-G world until he was 23 standard years old. RNA medication and serious PAX military exercise has toughened and strengthened the trooper until he can fight on any world. Reserved to the point of muteness, AGKT Rettig listens well, follows orders well, and, as the battle on Hyperion showed, survives well. Corporal Key is as voluble as Rettig is silent. During their first day of discussion, Key's questions and comments show insight and clarity, despite the brain-fogging effects of resurrection. All four of the men are shaken by the experience of death. De Soya tries to convince them that it gets easier with experience, but his own shaken body and wits put the lie to these reassurances. Here, without counseling and therapy and the welcoming resurrection chaplains, each of the PAX soldiers is dealing with the trauma as best they can. Their conferences on the first day in Parvati space are interrupted frequently as fatigue or sheer emotion overcome them. Only Sergeant Gregorius is outwardly unshaken by the experience. On the third day, they meet in Raphael's tiny wardroom, cubby, to plot their final course of action. In 2 months and 3 weeks, that ship is going to translate into this system less than 1,000 clicks from where we're station holding, says Father Captain de Soya, and we have to be certain that we can intercept it and detain the girl. None of the Swiss Guard soldiers has asked why the girl's detention is required. None will discuss the issue until their commanding officer, de Soya, raises it first. Each will die, if necessary, to carry out the cryptic order. "We don't know who else is on board the ship, right?" says Corporal Key. They have discussed these items, but memories are faulty for the first few days of their new lives. "No," says de Soya. "We don't know the armament of the ship," says Key, as if checking off a mental list. "Correct." "We don't know if Parvati is the ship's destination." "Correct."
It could be, says Corporal Key, that the ship is scheduled to rendezvous with another ship here, or perhaps the girl means to meet someone on the planet.
De Soya nods. The Raphael doesn't have the sensors of my old torch ship, but we're sweeping everything between the Oort cloud and Parvati itself. If another ship translates before the girls, we'll know at once. Ouster, says Sergeant Gregorius. De Soya raises his hands. Everything's speculation. I can tell you that the child is considered a threat to the Pax, so it's reasonable to conclude that the ousters, if they know of her existence, might want to grab her. We're ready, if they try. Key rubs his smooth cheek.
I still can't quite believe that we could hop home in a day if we wanted to, or go for help.
Home for Corporal Key is the Jamnu Republic on Deneb Dry. They have discussed why it would be useless to ask for help. The closest Pax warship is the St. Anthony, which should be, if De Soya's orders were obeyed, in hot pursuit of the girl's ship. I've tight-beamed the commander of the Pax garrison on Parvati, says De Soya. As our computer inventory showed, they have just their orbital patrol craft and a couple of rock jumpers. I've ordered him to put every spacecraft they have into cislunar defensive positions, to alert all the outposts on the planet, and to await further orders. If the girl was to get past us and land there, the Pax would find her. What kind of world is Parvati? Asks Gregorius. The man's bass rumble of a voice always gets De Soya's attention. It was settled by reformed Hindus not long after the Hejira, says De Soya, who has accessed all this on the ship's computer. Desert world. Not enough oxygen to support humans, mostly CO2 atmosphere, and it was never enough of a success to terraform, so either the environments are tailored or the people are. Population was never large, a few dozen million before the fall. Fewer than 500,000 now, and most of them live in the one big city of Gandhiji.
Christians?
Asks Key. De Soya guesses that the question is more than idle curiosity. Key asks few random questions. A few thousand in Gandhiji have converted, says De Soya. There is a new cathedral here, St. Malachi's, and most of the born-again are prominent business people who favor joining the Pax. They talked the planetary government, a sort of elective oligarchy, into inviting the Pax garrison here about 50 standard years ago. They're close enough to the outback to worry about the ousters.
Key nods. I just wondered if the garrison could count on the populace reporting it when the girl's ship lands. When the girl's ship lands.
Oh, let's try this again.
I just wondered if the garrison could count on the populace reporting it when the girl's ship lands.
I don't know why I'm converting to an Australian accent right at the end there, but we'll work with it. Doubtful, says De Soya. 99% of the world is empty, never settled or gone back to sand dunes and lichen fields, with most of the people huddled around the big bauxite mines near Gandhiji. But the orbital patrols would track her. If she gets that far, says Gregorius. Which she will not, says Father Captain De Soya. He touches a tabletop monitor, which brings up the graphic he has prepared. Here's the intercept plan. We snooze until T-3 days. Don't worry. Remember, Fugue doesn't have the hangover time of resurrection. Half an hour to shake the cobwebs out. Okay, so T-3 days, the alarm goes off. Raphael's been looping out to here. He taps the diagram at 0.2/3 the way around the ellipsoid trajectory. We know their ship's C+ entry velocity, which means we know their exit velocity. It will be about 0.03 c, so if they're decelerating toward Parvati at the same rate they left Hyperion... The trajectory and timeline diagrams fill the screen. This is hypothetical, but their translation point is not. It will be here. He touches a stylus to a red point 10 AUs from the planet. Their own trajectory ellipsoid blinks its way to that point. And here is where we intercept them, less than a minute from their translation point. Gregorius leans over his monitor. We'll all be going like a fat fucking bat out of hell, pardon the language, father. De Soya smiles. De Soya smiles. We'll all be going like a fucking bat out of hell, pardon the language, father. You are absolved, my son. Yes, velocities will be high, as will be our combined delta V's if their ship commences deceleration toward Parvati, but relative velocities for the two ships will be almost nil.
How close will we be, Captain? Says Key. The man's black hair glistens in the overhead spots. "When they translate, we'll be bearing down at them at a distance of 600 clicks. Within 3 minutes, we'll be able to throw a rock at them." Key frowns. "But what will they throw at us?" "Unknown," says de Soya, "but the Raphael is tough. I'm betting that her shields can take anything this unidentified ship throws at us." Lancer Rettig grunts. "Bad bet to lose." De Soya swivels his chair to look at the trooper. He had almost forgotten Rettig was there. "Yes," he says, "but we have the advantage of being close. Whatever they throw at us, they'll have a limited time to throw." "And what do we throw at them?" rumbles Gregorius. De Soya pauses. "I've gone over Raphael's armament with you," he says at last. "If this were an ouster warship, we could fry, bake, ram, or burn it. Or we could just make its crew die quietly. Raphael carries death beam weaponry. At 500 clicks, there would be no doubt of its effectiveness." "But we're not going to use any of that," continues the Father Captain, "unless we absolutely have to disable the ship." "Can you do that without danger of hurting the girl?" asks Key. "Not with 100% assurance of not hurting her, and whoever else is aboard," says de Soya. He pauses again, takes a breath, and continues. "That's why you're going to board her." Gregorius grins. His teeth are very large and very white. "We grabbed space armor for all of us before leaving the St. Thomas Akira," rumbles the giant happily, "but it'd be better if we practiced in it before the actual boarding." De Soya nods. 3 days enough? Gregorius is still grinning. "I'd rather have a week." "All right," says the Father Captain. "We'll wake up a week before intercept. Here's a schematic of the unidentified ship." "I thought it was unidentified," says Key, looking at the ship's plans now filling the monitors. The spacecraft is a needle with fins at one end, a child's caricature of a spaceship. "We don't know its specific identity or registration," says de Soya, "but the St. Anthony tight-beamed video that it and the Bonaventure took of the ship before we translated, it's not Auster." "Not Auster, not Pax, not Mercantilus, not a spin ship or a torch ship," says Key. "What the hell is it?" De Soya advances the images to ship cross-sections. "Private spacecraft, hegemony era," he says softly. "Only 30 or so ever made. At least 400 years old, probably older." Corporal Key whisses softly. Gregorius rubs his huge jaw. Even Rettig looks impressed behind his impassive mask. "I didn't know there ever were private spacecraft," says the corporal. C+, I mean. "The hegemony used to reward high muckamucks with them," says de Soya. "Prime Minister Gladstone used to have one. So did General Horace Glennon Height." "The hegemony didn't reward him with one," says Key with a chuckle. Glennon Height was the most infamous and legendary opponent the early hegemony ever had, the Outback's Hannibal to the World Web's Rome. "No," agrees Father Captain de Soya, "the general stole his from the planetary governor of Sol Draconi Septum. Anyway, the computer says that all of these private ships were accounted for before the fall, destroyed or reconfigured for force use, and then decommissioned. But the computer appears to be wrong." "Not the first time," grumbles Gregorius. "Not the first time," grumbles Gregorius. "Do these long-range images show any armament or defensive systems?" "No, the original ships were civilian, no weapons, and the St. Bonaventure's sensors didn't pick up any acquisition radars or pulse readings before the Shrike killed the imaging team," says de Soya. "But this ship's been around for centuries, so we have to assume that it had been modified. But even if it has modern ouster standoff weaponry, Raphael should be able to get in close, fast, while we hold off their lances. Once we're alongside, they can't use kinetic weapons. By the time we grapple, the energy weapons will be useless." "Hand to hand," says Gregorius to himself. The sergeant is studying the schematic. "They'd be waiting at the airlock, so we'll blow a new door here and here." De Soya feels a prickling of alarm. "We can't let the atmosphere out. The girl—" Gregorius shows a shark's grin. "Not to worry, sir. It takes less than a minute to rake a big catch bag on the hull. I brought several with the armor. And then we blow the whole section inward. Scoot in." He keys a closer image. I'll rig this for StimSim so he can rehearse in 3D for a few days. I'd like another week for Sim. The black face turns toward Soya. May not get any fugue beauty sleep after all, sir. Key is tapping his lip with a finger. Question, Captain. Soya looks at him. I understand that under no circumstances can we harm the girl, but what about the others that get in the way? Soya sighs. He has been waiting for the question. I'd prefer that no one else dies on this mission, Corporal. Yes, sir, says Key, his eyes alert. But what if they try to stop us? Father Captain Soya blanks the monitor. The crowded cubby smells of oil and sweat and ozone. My orders were that the child is not to be harmed. My orders were that the child is not to be harmed, he says slowly, carefully. Nothing was said about anyone else. If there's someone, or something, else on the ship, and they try to get in the way, consider them expendable. Defend yourselves, even if you have to shoot before you're certain you're in danger. Kill them all, mutters Gregorius, except the kid, and let God sort them out. Soya has always hated that ancient mercenary joke. Do whatever you have to do without endangering the girl's life or health, he says. What if there's only one other on board standing between us and the girl, says Rettig. The other 3 men look at the Stroider. But it's the Shrike thing, he finishes. The cubby is silent except for the omnipresent ship sounds, expanding and contracting metal from the hull, the whisper of ventilators, the hum of equipment, the occasional burp of a thruster. If it's the Shrike, begins Father Captain Soya. He pauses. If it's the wee Shrike, says Sergeant Gregorius, I think we can bring a few surprises for it. This round may not go so easy for that spiked son of a bitch, pardon my language, Father. As your priest, says Soya, I will warn you again about the use of profanity. As your commanding officer, I order you to come up with as many surprises as you can to kill that spiked son of a bitch. They adjourn to eat their evening meal and plan their respective strategies. '21. Have you ever noticed how on a trip, even a very long one, it is often the first week or so that stands out most clearly in your memory? Perhaps it is the enhanced perception that voyages bring, or perhaps it is an effect of orientation response on the senses, or perhaps it is simply that even the charm of newness soon wears off. But it has been my experience that the first days in a new place, or seeing new people, often set the tone for the rest of the trip. Or, in this case, the rest of my life. We spent the first day of our magnificent adventure sleeping. The child was exhausted, and, I had to admit, after waking from 16 hours of uninterrupted sleep, so was I. I can't vouch for what Bettik did during this first somnambulant day of the voyage. At that point, I had not learned that androids do sleep, but require only a fraction of the time we humans spend comatose. But he had set his small backpack of possessions in the engine room, rigging a hammock to sleep in, and he spent much of his time down there. I had planned to give the girl the master bedroom at the apex of the ship. She had showered there in the adjoining bathroom cubby that first morning, but she staked out one of the sleep couches on the fugue deck, and that soon became her space. I enjoyed the size and softness of the large bed in the center of the circular top room, and, after a while, even overcame my agoraphobia and allowed the hull to go translucent to watch the fractal light show in Hawking space outside. I never kept the hull transparent for long, however, for the pulsing geometries continued to disturb me in ways I could not describe. The library level and the hollow-pit level were, by unspoken agreement, common ground. The kitchen, Bettik called it the galley, was set into the wall on the hollow-pit level, and we usually ate at the low table in the hollow-pit or occasionally carried the food up to the round table near the navigation cubby. I admit that immediately after awakening and having breakfast, ship time said that it was afternoon on Hyperion, but why abide by Hyperion time when I might never see that world again?
I headed for the library. The books were ancient, all published during the time of the hegemony or earlier, and I was surprised to find a copy of an epic poem by Martin Silenus, The Dying Earth, as well as tomes by a dozen classical authors whom I had read as a boy, and often reread during my long days and nights at the Fen cabin or while working on the river. Bettik joined me that first day as I browsed, and pulled a small green volume from the shelves. "This might be of interest," he said. The title was A Traveler's Guide to the World Web, with special sections on the Grand Concourse and River Tethys. "It might be of great interest," I said, opening the book with shaking fingers. The shaking, I believe, came from the reality that we were going there, actually traveling to the former web worlds. "These books are doubly interesting as artifacts," said the android, "since they came from an age when all information was instantaneously available to anyone." I nodded. As a child, listening to Grandam's tales of the old days, I had tried to imagine a world where everyone wore implants and could access the datasphere whenever they wanted. Of course, even then, Hyperion had no datasphere, and had never been part of the web, but for most of the billions of members of the hegemony, life must have been like an endless stim-sim of visual, auditory, and printed information. No wonder a majority of humans had never learned to read during the old days. Literacy had been one of the first goals of the Church and its Pax administrators after interstellar society was stitched together long after the fall. That day, standing in the carpeted ship's library, the polished teak and cherrywood walls gleaming in the light, I remember taking half a dozen books from the shelves and carrying them to the table to read. Aenea raided the library that afternoon as well, immediately pulling The Dying Earth from the shelves. "There were no copies in Jacktown, and Uncle Martin refused to let me read it when I visited him," she said. "He did say that it was the only thing he'd ever written, other than the cantos that he never finished, that was worth reading." "What's it about?" I asked, not looking up from the Delmore Deland novel I was looking at. Delmore Deland? I'm not sure. Anyway, he's reading a Delmore Deland novel. "What's it about?" I asked, not looking up from the Delmore Deland novel I was looking at. Both the girl and I were munching on apples as we read and talked. Bettik had gone back down the spiral stairs. "The last days of old Earth," said Aenea. "It's really about Martin's pampered childhood on his family's big estate on the North American Preserve." I set my book down. "What do you think happened to old Earth?" The girl stopped munching. "In my day, everyone thought that the big mistake of Art 8 black hole had eaten it, that it was gone, kaput." I chewed and nodded. "Most people still believe that, but the old poet's cantos insist that the Technocore stole old Earth and sent it somewhere." "The Magellanic Clouds," said the girl, and took another bite of apple. My mother discovered that when she and my father were investigating his murder." I leaned forward. "Do you mind talking about your father?" Aenea smiled slightly. "No, why should I? I suppose I'm somewhat of a half-breed, the child of a Lucian woman and a cloned cybrid male, but that's never bothered me." "You don't look very Lucian," I said. Residents of that high-G world were invariably short and very strong. Most were pale of skin and dark-haired. This child was small, but of a height normal to 1G worlds. Her brown hair was streaked with blonde, and she was slender. Only her luminous brown eyes reminded me of the canto's description of Braun Lamia. Aenea laughed. It was a pleasant sound. "I take after my dad," she said. "John Keats was short, blonde, and skinny." I hesitated a moment before saying, "You said that you spoke to your father." Aenea glanced at me from the corners of her eyes. "Yes, and you know that the Corps killed his body before I was born. But did you also know that my mother carried his persona for months in a Schroen loop embedded behind her ear?" I nodded. It was in the cantos. The girl shrugged. "I remember talking to him." "But you weren't born," said Aenea. "Right. What kind of a conversation could a poet's persona have with a fetus? But we talked. His persona was still connected to the Technocore. He showed me... Well, it's complicated, Raul. Believe me." "I believe you," I said. I looked around the library.
Did you know that the Canto says that when your father's persona left the Shrone Loop, it resided in this ship's AI for a while? Yeah, said Aenea. She grinned. Yesterday, before I went to sleep, I spent an hour or so talking to the ship. My dad was here all right. The persona coexisted with the ship's mind when the console flew back to check out what had happened to the web after the fall. But he's not here now, and the ship can't remember much about his residence here, and it doesn't remember anything about what happened to him, whether he left after the console died or what, so I don't know if he still exists. Well, I said, trying to choose diplomatic words, the core doesn't exist any longer, so I don't quite see how a cybrid persona could either. Who says the core doesn't exist? I admit that I was shocked by that statement. The last act of Maenad Gladstone and the hegemony was to destroy the Farcaster links, the data spheres, the fat line, and the entire dimension that the core existed in, I said at last. Even the Cantos agrees with that fact. The child was still smiling. Oh, they blew the space-based Farcasters to bits, and the others quit working all right. And the data spheres were gone in my time, too. But who says the core is dead? That's like saying that you swept away a couple of spider webs, so the spider has to be dead. I admit that I looked over my shoulder. So you think the Technocore still exists? That those AIs are still plotting against us? I don't know about the plotting, said Aenea, but I know that the core exists. How? She held up a small finger. First of all, my father's cybrid persona still existed after the fall, right? The basis for that persona was a core AI they had fashioned. That shows that the core was still somewhere. I thought about that. As I mentioned earlier, cybrids, like androids, were essentially a mythical species to me. We might as well have been discussing the physical characteristics of leprechauns. Secondly, she said, lifting a second finger to join the first, I've communicated with the core. I blinked at that statement. Before you were born? I said. Yes, said Aenea, and when I lived with Mother in Jacktown, and after Mother died. She lifted her books and stood. And this morning. I could only stare. I'm hungry, Raul, she said from the head of the stairs. Want to go down and see what this old ship's galley can womp up for lunch? Oh, that's a noise. I'll see if they send me more. We soon settled into a schedule on the ship, adopting Hyperion's day and night schedules roughly as waking and sleeping times. I began to see why the old hegemony habit of keeping the 24-hour old Earth system as standard had been so important in the web days. I'd read somewhere that almost 90% of the Earth-like or terraformed worlds of the web had held days that fell within 3 hours of the old Earth standard day. Aenea still liked to extend the balcony and play the Steinway out under the hawking space sky, and I would sometimes stay out there and listen for a few minutes, but I preferred the sense of being surrounded that the interior of the ship gave me. None of us complained about the effects of the C+ environment, although we felt it. The occasional lurching of emotion and balance, a constant sense that someone was watching us, and very strange dreams. My own dreams awakened me with the pounding heart, dry mouth, and sweat-soaked sheets that only the worst nightmares could cause. But I never remembered the dreams. I wanted to ask the others about their dreams, but Bettik never mentioned this. I did not know if androids could dream, and although Aenea acknowledged the strangeness of her dreams and said that she did remember them, she never discussed them. On the second day, while we were sitting in the library, Aenea suggested that we experience space travel. When I asked her how we could experience it more than we were, I had the hawking fractals in mind when I said that, she only laughed and asked the ship to cancel the internal containment field. Immediately, we were weightless. As a boy, I had dreamed of zero-G. Swimming in the salty South Sea as a young soldier, I had closed my eyes, floated effortlessly, and wondered if this was what space travel in the olden days had been like. I can tell you, it is not. Zero-G, especially sudden zero-G, such as the ship granted upon Aenea's request, is terrifying. It is, quite simply, falling. Or so it first seems. I gripped the chair, but the chair was also falling. It was precisely as if we had been sitting in one of the huge bridle range cable cars for the past 2 days, when suddenly the cable broke. My middle ear protested, trying to find a horizon line that was honest. None were. Bettik kicked up from wherever he had been below and said calmly, "Is there a problem?" "No," laughed Aenea. "We're just going to experience space for a while." Bettik nodded and then pulled himself head first down the stairway pit to get back to whatever he was working on. Aenea followed him to the stairwell, kicking over to the central opening. "See?" she said. "This stairwell becomes a central drop shaft when the ship is 0G, just like in the old spin ships." "Isn't this dangerous?" I asked, switching my grip from the back of a chair to a bookshelf. For the first time, I noticed the elastic cords that held the books in place. Everything else that was not attached, the book I had set on the table, the chairs around the table, the book I had set on the table, the chairs around the table, a sweater I'd left thrown over the back of another chair, pieces of the orange I had been eating, was floating. "Not dangerous," said Aenea. "Messy. Next time we get everything ship-shape before we cancel the internal field." "But isn't the field important?" Aenea was floating upside down from my perspective. My inner ear liked this even less than the rest of the experience. "The field keeps us from being squashed and thrown around when we're moving in normal space," she said, pulling herself to the center of the 20-meter drop by grabbing the stairway railing. "But we can't speed up or slow down in C+ space, so here goes!" She grabbed a handhold along the rod that ran the length of the ship in the center of what had been the open stairwell and catapulted herself out of sight, head first. "Jesus," I whispered, pushed away from the bookcase, bouncing off the opposite bulkhead, and followed her down the central drop shaft. For the next hour, we played in 0G. 0G tag, 0G hide and seek, finding that one could hide in the oddest places when gravity was not a restraint. 0G soccer using one of the plastic space helmets from a locker on the storage/corridor deck, and even 0G wrestling, which was immensely harder than I would have imagined. My first attempt to grab the child sent both of us tumbling and crashing through the length, breadth, and height of the fugue deck. In the end, exhausted and sweaty, the perspiration hung in the air until one moved or a trickle of air from the ventilators moved it, I discovered, Aenea ordered the balcony opened again. I shouted in fear when she did so, but the ship quietly reminded me that the exterior field was quite intact, and we floated out above the bolted-down Steinway, floated to the railing and beyond, into that no-man's land between the ship and the field, floated 10 meters out and looked back at the ship itself, surrounded by exploding fractals, glowing in the cold fireworks glory of it as hawking space folded and contracted around us several billion times a second. Finally, we kicked and swam our way back in, a difficult and awkward feat, I discovered, when there was nothing to push against, warned Bettik over the intercom to find a floor, and brought back the 1G internal field. Both the child and I giggled as sweaters, sandwiches, chairs, books, and several spheres of water from a glass that had been left out came crashing down to the carpet. It was that same day, night rather, for the ship had dimmed the lights for a sleep period. It was that same day, night rather, for the ship had dimmed the lights for sleep period, that I padded down the spiral stairs to the hollow pit level to fix a midnight snack and heard soft sounds from the opening to the fugue deck below. "Aenea?" I said, speaking softly. There was no answer. I went to the head of the stairs, looking at the dark drop in the center of the stairwell and smiling as I remembered our mid-air antics there a few hours before. "Aenea?" There still came no answer, but the soft sounds continued. Wishing I had a flashlight, I padded down the metal stairs in my sock feet. There was a soft glow from the fugue sleep monitors above the couches tucked in their cubbies. The soft sound was coming from Aenea's cubby. She had her back to me. The blanket was pulled to her shoulders, but I could see the collar of the consul's old shirt that she had appropriated for use as a nightshirt. I walked over, my sock feet making no noise on the soft floor, and knelt by the couch. "Aenea?" The girl was crying, obviously trying to muffle her sobs. I touched her shoulder, and she finally turned. Even in the dim instrument glow, I could see that she had been weeping for some time. Her eyes were red and puffy, her cheeks streaked with tears. "What's wrong, kiddo?" I whispered. We were 2 decks above, where Bettik slept in his hammock in the engine room, but the stairwell was open. For a moment, Aenea did not respond, but eventually the sobs slowed, then stopped. "I'm sorry," she said at last. "It's all right. Tell me what's wrong." "Give me a tissue and I will," said the girl. I rummaged in the pockets of the old robe the consul had left. I had no tissue, but I had been using a napkin with the cake I'd been eating upstairs. I handed her the linen. "Thanks." She blew her nose. "I'm glad we're not still in 0G, she said through the cloth. "There'd be snot floating everywhere." I smiled and squeezed her shoulder. "What's wrong, Aenea?" She made a soft noise that I realized was an attempt at a laugh. "Everything," she said. "Everything's wrong. I'm scared. Everything I know about the future scares the shit out of me. I don't know how we're going to get past the PAX guys that I know will be waiting for us in a few days. I'm homesick. I can never go back, and everybody I knew except Martin is gone forever. Mostly, though. I guess I just miss my mother." I squeezed her shoulder. Braun Lamia, her mother, was the stuff of legend, a woman who had lived and died 2.5 long centuries ago. A few of her bones had already turned to dust, wherever they were buried. For this child, her mother's death was only 2 weeks in the past. "I'm sorry," I whispered, and squeezed her shoulder again, feeling the texture of the consul's old shift. "It'll be all right." Aenea nodded and took my hand. Hers was still moist. I noticed how tiny her palm and fingers were against my huge paw. "Want to come up to the galley and have some chalma root cake and milk with me?" I whispered. "It's good." She shook her head. "I think I'll sleep now. Thanks, Raul." She squeezed my hand again before relinquishing it, and in that second I realized the great truth. The one who teaches, the new Messiah, whatever Braun Lamia's daughter would turn out to be, she was also a child. One who giggled in zero-gravity antics and who wept in the night. I went softly up the stairs, stopping to look back at her before my head rose above the level of the next deck. She was huddled under her blanket, her face turned away again, her hair catching only a bit of the console glow from above her cubby. "Good night, Aenea," I whispered, knowing that she would not hear me. "It will be all right." "22. Sergeant Gregorius and his 2 troopers are waiting in the open Sallyport airlock of the Raphael as the Archangel-class starship closes on the unidentified spacecraft that has just translated from C+. Their spacesuit armor is cumbersome, and, with their reactionless rifles and energy weapons slung, the 3 men fill the airlock. Parvati's sun gleams on their gold visors as they lean out into space. "I've got it locked," comes Father Captain de Soya's voice in their earphones. "Distance 100 meters and closing." The needle-shaped craft with fins on the stern fills their vision as the 2 ships close. Between the spacecraft, defensive containment fields blur and flash, dissipating high-energy CPB and lance attacks faster than the eye can follow. Gregorius's visor opaques, clears, and then opaques as the close-in battle flares. "All right, inside their minimum lance range," says de Soya from his perch on the combat control center couch. "Go!" Gregorius gives a hand signal, and his men kick off at the precise instant he does. Needle thrusters in their suits' reaction packs spurt tiny blue flames as they correct their arc. "Disrupting fields, now!" cries de Soya. The clashing containment fields cancel each other for only a few seconds, but it is enough. Gregorius, Key, and Rettig are in the other ship's defensive egg now. "Key," says Gregorius over the tight beam, and the smaller figure tweaks thrusters and hurtles towards the bow of the decelerating ship. "Rettig." The other suit of combat armor accelerates toward the lower third of the ship. Gregorius himself waits until the last second to kill his forward velocity, does a complete forward roll at the last instant, applies full thruster, and feels his heavy soles touch hull plate with hardly a tap. He activates the electromagnets in his boots, feels the connection, widens his stance, and then crouches on the hull with only one boot in contact. "On," comes Corporal Key's voice on tight beam. "On," says Rettig a second later. Sergeant Gregorius pulls the line of boarding collar from around his waist, sets it against the hull, activates the stick light, and continues kneeling in it. He is within a black hoop a little more than 1.5 meters in diameter. "On the count from 3, he says into his mic. 3, 2, 1, deploy." He touches his wrist controller and blinks as a micro-thin canopy of molecular polymer spins up from the hoop, closes over his head, and continues to bulge above him. Within 10 seconds, he is within a 20-meter transparent bag, like a combat-armored shape crouching within a giant condom. "Ready," says Key. Rettig echoes the word. "Sit," says Gregorius, slapping a charge against the hull and setting his gauntleted finger back against his wrist plate. "From 5. The ship is rotating under them now, firing thrusters and its main engines almost at random, but the Raphael has it locked in a containment field death grip, and the men on its hull are not thrown free. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now!" The detonation is soundless, of course, but is also without flash or recoil. 120-centimeter circle of hull flies inward. Gregorius can see only the gossamer hint of Key's polymer bag around the curve of the hull, sees the sunlight strike it as it inflates. Gregorius's bag also inflates like a giant balloon as atmosphere rushes out of the hull breach and fills the space around him. He hears a hurricane screech through his external pickups for 5 seconds, then silence as the space around him, now filled with oxygen and nitrogen according to his helmet sensors, fills with dust and detritus, blown out during the brief pressure differential. "Going in, now," cries Gregorius, unslinging his reactionless plasma rifle as he kicks his way into the interior. There is no gravity. That is a surprise to the sergeant. He is ready to hit the decks rolling, but he adapts within seconds and twists in a circle, peering around. Some sort of common area. Gregorius sees seat cushions, some sort of ancient vid screen, bookshelves with real books. A man floats up the central drop shaft. "Halt!" cries Gregorius, using common radio bands and his helmet loudspeaker. The figure, little more than a silhouette, does not halt. The man has something in his hand. Gregorius fires from the hip. The plasma slug bores a hole 10 centimeters wide through the man. Blood and viscera explode outward from the tumbling figure, some of the globules spattering on Gregorius's visor and armored chest plate. The object falls from the dead man's hand, and Gregorius glances at it as he kicks by to the stairwell. It is a book. "Shit," mutters the sergeant. He has killed an unarmed man. He will lose points for this. "In, top level, no one here," radios Key. "Coming down." "Engine room," says Rettig. "One man here. Tried to run and I had to burn him. No sign of the child. Coming up." "She must be on the middle level or the airlock level," snaps the sergeant into his mic. "Proceed with care." The lights go out, and Gregorius's helmet searchlight and the pen light on his plasma rifle come on automatically, beams quite visible through the air filled with dust, blood spheres, and tumbling artifacts. He stops at the top of the stairwell. Someone or something is drifting up toward him. He shifts his helmet, but the light on the plasma rifle illuminates the shape first. It is not the girl. Gregorius gets a confused impression of great size, razor wire, spikes, too many arms, and blazing red eyes. He must decide in a second or less. If he fires plasma bolts down the open drop shaft, he might hit the child. If he does nothing, he dies. Razor talons reach for him even as he hesitates. Gregorius has lashed the death wand to his plasma rifle before making the ship-to-ship jump. Now he kicks aside, finds an angle, and triggers the wand. The razor wire shape floats past him, 4 arms limp, the red eyes fading. Gregorius thinks, "The goddamn thing isn't invulnerable to death wands. It has synapses." He catches a glimpse of someone above him, swings the rifle, identifies Key, and the 2 men kick down the drop shaft head first. "Embarrassing if someone turns the internal field back on now and gravity comes on," thinks Gregorius. "Make a note of that." "I've got her," calls Rettig. "She was hiding in one of the fugue cubbies." Gregorius and Key float down past the common level and kick out onto the fugue level. A massive figure in combat armor is holding the child. Gregorius notes the brown blonde hair, the dark eyes, and the small fists flailing uselessly against Rettig's chest armor. "That's her," he says. He keys the tight beam to the ship. "Clear the ship. We have the girl. Only 2 defenders and the creature this time." "Affirmative," comes to Soya's voice. 2 minutes, 15 seconds. Impressive. Come on out. Gregorius nods, takes a final glance at the captive child, no longer struggling, and keys his suit controls. He blinks and sees the other 2 lying next to him, their suits connected umbilically to VR Tactical. Soya has actually turned off the internal fields in the Raphael, better to maintain the illusion. Gregorius removes his helmet, sees the other 2 sweaty faces as they do the same, and begins to help Key remove his clumsy armor. The 3 met Soya in the wardroom cubby. They could meet as easily in the stim-sim of tactical space, but they prefer physical reality for their debriefings. "It was smooth," says Soya as they take their places around the small table. "Too smooth," says the sergeant. "I don't believe that death wands are going to kill the Shrike thing. And I screwed up with the guy on the navigation deck. He just had a book." Soya nods. "You did the right thing, though. Better to take him out than to take chances."
2 unarmed men, says Corporal Key. "I doubt it. This is about as unrealistic as the dozen armed guys on the 3rd run-through. We should play more of the Ouster encounters. Marine-level lethality, at least."
"I don't know," mutters Rettig. They look at him and wait. "We keep getting the girl without any harm coming to her," says the man at last.
"That 5th sim,"
begins Key. Yeah, says Rettig. "I know we accidentally killed her then, but the whole ship was wired to blow in that one. I doubt if that will happen. Whoever heard of 100 million mark spacecraft being rigged to self-destruct?" The other three look at one another and shrug. "It is a silly idea," says Father Captain Soya, "but I programmed the tacticals for wide parameters of—" "Yeah," interrupts Lancer Rettig, his thin face as sharp and menacing as a knife blade. "I just mean that if it does come to a firefight, the chances of the girl getting burned are a lot greater than our sims suggest. That's all." This is the most the other 3 have heard Rettig say in weeks of living and rehearsing on the small ship. "You're right," says Soya. "For our next sim, I'll raise the danger level for the child." Gregorius shakes his head. "Captain, sir, I suggest we knock off the sims and go back to the physical rehearsals. I mean—" He glances at his wrist chronometer. The memory of the bulky combat suit slows his movements. "I mean, we've just got 8 hours until this is for real."
"Yeah," says Corporal Key. "I agree. I'd rather be outside doing it for real, even if we can't sim the other ship that way."
Rettig grunts his assent. "I agree," says Soya. "But first we eat. Double rations. It's just been tactical, but you 3 have each lost 20 pounds in the last week." Sergeant Gregorius leans over the table. "Could we see the plot, sir?" Soya keys the monitor. Raphael's long ellipsoid trajectory and the escape ship's translation point are almost intersecting. The intersect point blinks red. "One more real space run-through," says Soya, "and then I want all of us to sleep at least 2 hours, go over our equipment, and take it easy." He looks at his own chronometer, even though the monitor is displaying ship and intercept time. "Barring accidents or the unexpected," he says, "the girl should be in our custody in 7 hours and 40 minutes, and we'll be getting ready to translate to Pacem."
"Sir,"
says Sergeant Gregorius.
"Yes, Sergeant."
Meaning no disrespect, sir," says the other man, "but there's no way in the good Lord's fucking universe that anyone can bar accidents or the unexpected."
"23. So," I said, "what's your plan?" Aenea looked up from the book she was reading. "Who says that I have a plan?" I straddled a chair. "It's less than an hour until we pop out in the Parvati system," I said. "A week ago you said that we needed a plan in case they know we're coming. So, what's the plan?" Aenea sighed and closed the book. Bettik had come up the stairway to the library, and now he joined us at the table, actually sitting with us, which was unusual for him. "I'm not sure I have a plan," said the girl. I'd been afraid of this. The week had passed pleasantly enough. The three of us had read a lot, talked a lot, played a lot. Aenea was excellent at chess, good at Go, and terrible at Monopoly, and the days had passed without incident. Many times I had tried to press her on her plans. Where did she plan to go? Why choose Renaissance Vector? Was finding ousters part of her quest? But her answers, while polite, were always vague. What Aenea showed great talent for was getting me talking. I hadn't known many children. Even when I was a child myself, there were few others in our caravan group, and I rarely enjoyed their company, since Grandom was infinitely more interesting to me. But the children and teenagers I'd encountered over the years had never shown this much curiosity or ability to listen. Aenea got me describing my years as a shepherd. She showed special interest in my apprenticeship as a landscape architect. She asked 1,000 questions about my river barge days and hunting guide days. In truth, it was only my soldiering days that she did not show much interest in. What she had seemed especially interested in was my dog, although even discussing Izzy, about raising her, training her as a bird dog, about her death, upset me quite a bit. I noticed that she could even get Bettik talking about his centuries of servitude, and here I often joined in the patient listening. The android had seen and experienced amazing things. Different worlds, the settling of Hyperion with Sad King Billy, the Shrike's early rampages across Equus, the final pilgrimage that the old poet had made famous, even the decades with Martin Silenus turned out to be fascinating. But the girl said very little. On our fourth evening out from Hyperion, she admitted that she had come through the Sphinx into her future not just to escape the Pack's troops hunting for her then, but to seek out her own destiny. "As a messiah?" I said, intrigued. Aenea laughed. "No," she said, "as an architect." I was surprised. Neither the Cantos nor the old poet himself had said anything about the so-called one who teaches earning a living as an architect. Aenea had shrugged. "It's what I want to do. In my dream, the one who could teach me lives in this era. So here I came." "The one who could teach you?" I said. "I thought you were the one who teaches." Aenea had flopped back into the hollow pit cushions and cocked her leg over the back of the couch. "Raul, how could I possibly teach anyone anything? I'm 11.5 standard years old, and I've never been off Hyperion before this. Hell, I never left the continent of Equus until this week. What do I have to teach?" I had no answer to that. "I want to be an architect," she said, "and in my dream the architect who can train me is somewhere out there." She waggled her fingers at the outer hall, but I understood her to mean the old hegemony web where we were heading. "Who is he?" "He's a she," said Aenea, "and I don't know her name." "What world is she on?" I asked. "I don't know." "Are you sure this is the right century?" I asked, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "Yeah, maybe. I think so." Aenea rarely acted petulant during the days I spent with her that week, but her voice seemed perilously close to that now. And you just dreamed about this person? She sat up in the cushions. Not just dreamed, she said then. My dreams are important to me. They're sort of more than dreams. She broke off. You'll see. I tried not to sigh aloud. What happens after you become an architect? She chewed on a fingernail. It was a bad habit I planned on breaking her of. What do you mean? I mean the old poets expecting big things of you. Being the Messiah is just one part. When does that kick in? Raul, she said, rising to go down and... Raul, she said, rising to go down to her fugue cubby. No offense, but why don't you fuck off and just leave me alone? She had apologized for that crudity later, but as we sat at the table an hour from translation into a strange star system, I was curious if my question about her plan would elicit the same response. It did not. She started to chew a nail, caught herself, and said, Okay, you're right. We need a plan. She looked at A. Bettik. Do you have one? The android shook his head. Master Silenus and I discussed this many times, Aenea, but our conclusion was that if the Pax somehow arrived first at our destination, then all was lost. It seems an improbability, though, since the torch ship pursuing us cannot travel more quickly through Hawking space than we can. I don't know, I said. Some of the hunters I've guided the past few years talked about rumors that the Pax, or the Church, had these super-fast ships. A. Bettik nodded. We have heard similar rumors, Endymion, but logic suggests that if the Pax had developed such craft, a breakthrough which the hegemony never achieved, by the way, then there seems little reason that they would not have outfitted their warships and mercantilist vessels with such a drive. Aenea tapped the table. It doesn't really matter how they got there first, she said. I've dreamed that they will. I've been considering plans, but... What about the Shrike? I said. Aenea glanced sideways at me. What about it? Well, I said, it provided a pretty convenient deus ex machina for us on Hyperion, so I just thought that if it could... Damn it, Raul! Cried the girl. I didn't ask that creature to kill those people on Hyperion. I wish to God it hadn't. I know, I said, touching her sleeve to calm her. A. Bettik had cut down several of the consul's old shirts for her, but her wardrobe was still meager. I knew that she had been upset about the carnage during our escape. She later admitted that it had been part of the reason for her sobbing that second night out. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. I didn't mean to be flippant about the... thing. I just thought that if someone tried to stop us again, maybe... No, said Aenea. I've dreamed that someone tries to stop us from getting to Renaissance Vector, but I haven't dreamed that the Shrike will help us. We have to come up with our own plan. What about the core? I said tentatively. It was the first time I'd mentioned the Technocore since she had brought it up the first day. Aenea seemed lost in thought, or at least she ignored my question. If we're going to get ourselves out of whatever trouble might be waiting for us, it will have to be our own doing. Or maybe... She turned her head. Ship? Yes, Aenea. Have you been listening to this conversation? Of course, Aenea. Do you have any ideas that could help us? Help you to avoid capture if Pax ships are waiting for you? Yes, said Aenea, Yes! No, it's yeah, said Aenea, her voice irritable. She frequently lost patience with the ship. Not any original ideas, said the ship. I've been trying to remember how the consul avoided the local authorities when we were just passing through a system. And? Said Aenea. Well, as I have mentioned, my memory is not as complete as it should be. Yes, said Aenea, but do you remember any clever ways you avoided local authorities? Well, primarily by outrunning them, said the ship. As we have discussed previously, the ouster modifications were to the containment field and the fusion drive. The latter changes allow me to reach C+ translation velocities much more quickly than standard spin ships, or so it was when I last travelled between the stars. A. Bettik folded his hands and spoke to the same bulkhead area that Aenea had been watching. You are saying that if the authorities, In this case, the Pax ships, left from the planet Parvati, or near it, you would be able to make the translation to Renaissance Vector before they could intercept us.
Most assuredly, said the ship.
How long will the turnaround take? I asked.
Turnaround?
The time in system before we can spin up to the quantum jump to Renaissance Vector's system, I said.
37 minutes, said the ship, which includes reorientation, navigation checks, and system checks.
What if a Pax ship is waiting right there when we spin down? Asked Aenea. Do you have any ouster modifications that could help us?
Not that I can think of, said the ship. You know of the enhanced containment fields, but they are still no match for a warship's weapons.
The girl sighed and leaned on the table. I've been over this, but I don't see how it can help.
Bettik looked thoughtful, but then again, he always looked thoughtful.
During the time we were concealing and caring for the ship, he said, one other ouster modification became apparent.
Bettik gestured downward toward the hollow-pit level below us.
They enhanced the ship's morphing ability. The way it can extrude the balcony is one example. Its ability to extend wings during atmospheric flight. It is able to open each separate living level to atmosphere, thus bypassing the old airlock entrance if necessary.
Neat, said Aenea, but I don't see how that would help unless the ship can morph to the point of passing itself off as a Pax torch ship or something. Can you do that, ship?
No, Aenea, said the soft male voice. The ousters carried out some fascinating piezodynamic engineering on me, but there is still the conservation of mass to reckon with. After a second of silence, I am sorry, Aenea.
Just a silly idea, said Aenea, and
then she sat straight up. It was so obvious that something had occurred to her that neither Bettik nor I interrupted her train of thought for 2 minutes. Finally she said,
Ship?
Yes, Aenea.
You're able to morph an airlock, or a simple opening, anywhere on your hull?
Almost anywhere, Aenea. There are communications pods in certain drive-related areas in which I could not...
But on the living decks? Interrupted the girl. You could just open them the way you let the upper hull go transparent?
Yes, Aenea.
Would the air rush out if you did that?
The ship's voice sounded mildly shocked as it answered. I would not allow that to happen, Aenea. As with the piano balcony, I would preserve the integrity of all external fields so that...
But you could open each deck, not just the airlock, and depressurize it?
The girl's persistence was new to me then. It is familiar now. Yes, Aenea. Bettik and I listened without comment. I could not speak for the android, but I had no idea where the kid was headed with all this. I leaned toward her. Is this part of a plan? I said. Aenea smiled crookedly. It was what I would later think of as her mischievous smile.
It's too primitive to be a plan, she said, and if my assumptions about why the Pax want me
Let's try that again.
It's too primitive to be a plan, she said, and if my assumptions about why the Pax wants me are wrong, well, it won't work.
The mischievous smile took on a wry twist.
It probably wouldn't work anyway.
I glanced at my wrist. We have 45 minutes until we spin down and find out if someone's waiting, I said. Do you want to share your plan that wouldn't work? The girl began speaking. She did not talk long. When she was finished, the android and I looked at each other. You're right, I said to her. It's not much of a plan, and it wouldn't work. Aenea's smile did not falter. She took my hand and turned my wrist so that my chronometer was face up.
We have 41 minutes, she said. Come up with a better one.
"24. The Raphael is on the final part of her return ellipsoid, rushing in-system toward Parvati's sun at .03 of light speed. The Archangel-class courier-slash-warship is ungainly. Massive drive bays, cobbled-together comm pods, spin arms, weapons platforms, and antennae array protruding, its tiny environmental sphere and attached dropship shuttle tucked into the mess almost as an afterthought. But it becomes a serious warship now as it rotates 180 degrees, so that it hurtles stern first toward the projected translation point of the ship it pursues.
1 minute to spin down, DeSoya says over the tactical band. The 3 troopers in the open Sallyport airlock do not need to acknowledge the transmission. They also know that even after the other ship appears in real space, it will not be visible to them, even with visor magnifiers, for another 2 minutes. Strapped in at his acceleration couch with the control panels arrayed around him, his gauntleted hand on the Omni-controller, his tactical shunt in place so that he and the ship are effectively one, Father Captain DeSoya listens to the breathing of the 3 troopers over the comm channel while he watches and senses the other ship's approach. Picking up Hawking Drive distortion reading down angle 39, coordinates 00039-199er. He says into his mic. Exit point at 900 clicks. Single vehicle probability 99%. Relative velocity 19 kps. 19 kps. Suddenly, the other ship becomes visible on radar, T-Dirac, and all passive sensors. Got it, Father Captain DeSoya says to the waiting troopers. On time, on schedule. Damn.
What?
Says Sergeant Gregorius. He and his men have checked their weapons, charges, and boarding collars. They are ready to jump in less than 3 minutes. The ship's begun accelerating, not decelerating as we'd guessed in most of the sims, says DeSoya. On the tactical channel, he enables the ship to carry out pre-programmed alternatives. Hang on, he says to the troopers, but the thrusters have already fired. Raphael is already rotating. No problem, he says as the main drive kicks on, boosting them to 147 gravities. Just stay within the field during the jump. It'll just take an extra minute to match velocities. Gregorius, Key, and Rettig do not respond. DeSoya can hear their breathing. 2 minutes later, DeSoya says, I have a visual. Sergeant Gregorius and his 2 troopers lean out of the open airlock. Gregorius can see the other ship as a ball of fusion flame. He keys the mag lenses so that he can see beyond that, raises the filters, and sees the ship itself. Pretty much like the tacticals, says Key.
Don't think that way, snaps the sergeant. The real thing's never been in the tacticals. The real thing's never liked the tacticals.
He knows that both these men realize that. They have been in combat. But Sergeant Gregorius was an instructor at PAX Command on Armagast for 3 years, and the instinct is hard to break.
This thing's fast, says DeSoya. If we didn't have the bounce on them, I don't think we'd catch them. As it is, we'll just be able to match velocities for 5 or 6 minutes.
We only need 3, says Gregorius. Just get us alongside, Captain.
Coming alongside now, says DeSoya. She's painting us. The Raphael was not designed with stealth capabilities, and now every instrument records the other ship's sensors on her. 1 click, he reports. Still no weapons activity. Fields on full. Delta V dropping. 800 meters. Gregorius, Key, and Rettig unsling their plasma rifles and crouch. 300 meters. 200 meters, says DeSoya. The other ship is passive, its acceleration high but constant. In most of the sims, DeSoya had factored in a wild chase before matching speeds and disrupting the other ship's fields. This is too easy. The Father Captain feels concern for the first time. Inside minimum lance range, he reports. Go! The 3 Swiss Guard troopers explode out of the airlock, their reaction packs spurting blue flame. Disrupting now! Cries DeSoya. The other ship's fields refuse to drop for an eternity, almost 3 seconds, a time never simulated in the tactical exercises, but eventually they drop. Fields down, calls DeSoya, but the troopers already knew that. They are tumbling, but the troopers already know that. They are tumbling, decelerating, and dropping onto the enemy hull at their prearranged entry points. Key near the bow, Gregorius on what had been the navigation level of the old schematics, Rettig above the engine room. On, comes Gregorius's voice. The other 2 confirm landing a second later.
Boarding collars set,
pants the sergeant.
Set,
confirms Key.
Set,
says Rettig.
Deploy from 3,
snaps the sergeant.
3, 2, 1, deploy.
His polymer bag gossamers into sunlight. On the command couch, DeSoya is waiting. On the command couch, de Soya is watching the Delta V. The acceleration has risen to more than 230 gravities. If the fields fail now, he shoves that thought aside. Raphael is straining to her utmost to keep velocities matched. Another 4 or 5 minutes, and he will have to fall away or risk overtaxing the ship's fusion drive systems. Hurry, he thinks, toward the combat armored shapes he sees in tactical space and video screens. Ready, reports Key.
Ready,
Comes Rettig's voice from near the stern fins on the absurd ship.
set charges.
Orders Gregorius, and slaps his onto the hull.
From 5, 5, 4, 3.
Father Captain de Soya,
Says a girl's voice. Wait! Orders de Soya. The girl's image has appeared on all comm bands. She is sitting at a piano. It is the same child he saw at the Sphinx on Hyperion 3 months before.
Stop!
Echoes Gregorius, his finger above the detonate button on his wrist plate. The other troopers obey. All are watching the vid broadcast on their visor inserts. How do you know my name? Asks Father Captain de Soya. Instantly he knows how stupid the question is. It does not matter. His men need to enter the ship within 3 minutes or the Raphael will fall behind, leaving them alone on the other ship. They had simulated that possibility, the troopers taking command of the ship after capturing the girl, slowing to wait for de Soya to catch up. But it is not a preferable scenario. He touches a press point that sends his vid image to the girl's ship.
Hello, Father Captain de Soya,
Says the girl, her voice in no hurry, her appearance showing little or no stress.
If your men try to enter the ship, I will depressurize my own ship and die.
De Soya blinks. Suicide is a mortal sin, he says. On the screen, the girl nods seriously.
Yes, she says, but I am not a Christian. Also, I'd rather go to hell than go with you.
De Soya looks intently at the image. Her fingers are not near any controls.
Captain,
Comes Gregorius's voice on the secure tight beam channel.
if she opens the airlock, I can get to her and get a transfer bag around her before complete decompression.
On the screen, the girl is watching. De Soya's lips are still as he sub-vocalizes on the tight beam channel.
She is not of the cross, he says. If she dies, there's no guarantee we can revive her. The odds are good that the ship's surgery can bring her back and repair her from simple decompression, says Gregorius. It'll take 30 seconds or more for her level to lose all of its air. I can get to her. Give the word.
I mean it,
says the child on the screen. Instantly, a circular section of hull opens under and around Corporal Key, and atmosphere blasts into vacuum, filling Key's boarding collar bag like a balloon, and tumbling him into it as both crash into the external field and slide toward the stern of the ship. Key's reaction pack fires madly, and he stabilizes himself before being blown into the fusion tail of the ship. Gregorius sets his finger on the shaped charge detonator.
Captain!
He cries. Wait! Subvocalizes de Soya. It is the sight of the girl in her shirt sleeves that freezes his heart with anxiety. Space between the two ships is now filled with colloidal particles and ice crystals.
I'm sealed away from the top room, says the girl, but if you don't call your men back, I'll open all the levels.
In less than a second, the airlock blasts open, and a 2-meter circle opens in the hull where Gregorius had been standing. The sergeant had burned his way through the collar bag and jetted to another location as soon as the girl spoke. Now he tumbles away from the blast of atmosphere and small debris jetting from the opening, fires his thrusters, and plants his boots on a section of hull 5 meters farther down the ship. In his mind, he can see the schematic, knows that the girl is just inside, a few meters from his grasp. If she was to blow this section, he would catch her, bag her, and have her in the Raphael's surgery within 2 minutes. He checks his tactical display. Rettig had jumped into space seconds before a section of hull opened under him. Now the other was station-keeping 3 meters from the hull.
Captain!
Gregorius calls on the tight beam. Wait, orders de Soya. To the girl he says, We mean you no harm.
Then call them off,
The girl snaps.
now, or I open this last level.
Federico de Soya feels time slow down as he weighs his options. He knows that he has less than a minute before he has to throttle back. Alarms and telltales are flashing throughout his tactical connections to the ship and across the boards. He does not want to leave his men behind, but the most important factor is the child. His orders are specific and absolute. Bring the child back alive. DeSoya's entire tactical virtual environment begins to pulse red, a warning that the ship must decelerate in 1 minute or automatic overrides will kick in. Wouldn't it just be stop accelerating? I don't know. His control boards tell the same story. He keys the audible mic channels, broadcasts on common bands as well as tight beam. Gregorius, Rettig Key, return to the Raphael. Now. Sergeant Gregorius feels the fury and frustration surge through him like a blast of cosmic radiation, but he is a member of the Swiss Guard.
Returning now, sir,
he snaps, peels off his shaped charge, and kicks off toward the Archangel. The other two rise from the hull with blue pinpricks of reaction thrusters. The merged fields flicker just long enough to allow the 3 armored men to pass through. Gregorius reaches the Raphael's hull first, grabs a hold on, and literally flings his men into the sally port as they float by. He pulls himself in, confirms that the others are clinging to the web restraints, and keys his mic.
In and tight, sir.
Breaking off, says DeSoya, broadcasting in the clear so that the girl can also hear. He switches from tactical space to real-time and tweaks the Omni-controller. Raphael cuts back from its 110% thrust, separates its field from the field... Let's try that again. Raphael cuts back from its 110% thrust, separates its field from the targets, and begins to fall behind. DeSoya widens the distance from the girl's ship, keeping Raphael as far away from the other craft's fusion tail as he can. All indications are that the other ship is unarmed, but that term is relative when the thing's fusion drive can reach 100 kilometers through space. The Xinti lesson. Raphael's external fields are on full defensive, the ship's countermeasures on full automatic, ready to react in a millionth of a second. The Xinti lesson being the concept of the power of a ship's drive is directly proportionate to its capability as a weapon. I think I've read the Xinti lesson on stream, one of my very early streams. It's a good one. Larry Niven. The girl's ship continues accelerating off the plane of the ecliptic. Parvati is not the child's destination. A rendezvous with the ousters? Wonders DeSoya. His ship's sensors still show no activity beyond Parvati's orbital patrols, but entire ouster swarms could be waiting beyond the heliosphere. 20 minutes later, the child's ship already hundreds of thousands of clicks ahead of Raphael, the question is answered. We've got a Hawking space distortion here, Father Captain DeSoya reports to the 3 men still clinging to restraints in the sally port lock. Our ship is preparing to spin up.
To where?
Asks Gregorius. The huge sergeant's voice reveals none of his fury at the near miss. DeSoya pauses and rechecks his readings before answering.
Renaissance vector space, he says. Very close to the planet.
Gregorius and the other 2 Swiss Guard troopers are silent. DeSoya can guess their unspoken questions. Why Renaissance Vector? It's a Pax stronghold. 2 billion Christians, tens of thousands of troops, scores of Pax warships. Why there?
Perhaps she doesn't know what's there,
he muses aloud over the intercom. He switches to tactical space and hovers above the plane of the ecliptic, watching the red dot spin up to C+ and disappear from the solar system. The Raphael still follows its stern chase course, 50 minutes from translation vector. DeSoya leaves tactical, checks all systems, and says, You can come up from the lock now. Secure all boarding gear. He does not ask their opinion. There is no discussion of whether he will translate the Archangel to Renaissance Vector space. The course has already been set in, and the ship is climbing toward Quantum Leap. And he does not ask them again if they are prepared to die again. This jump will be as fatal as the last, of course, but it will put them into Pax-occupied space 5 months ahead of the girl's ship. The only question in Soya's mind is whether or not to wait for the St. Anthony to spin down into Parvati's space so he can explain the situation to the captain. He decides not to wait. It makes little sense, a few hours difference in a 5-month head start, but he does not have the patience to wait. Soya orders Raphael to prepare a transponder buoy, and he records the orders for Captain Sati on the Anthony. Immediate translation to Renaissance Vector, a 10-day trip for the torch ship with the same 5-month time debt that the girl will pay, with readiness for combat immediately upon spinning down to RV space. When he has launched the buoy and tight-beamed stand-down orders to the Parvati command, Soya turns his acceleration couch to face the other 3 men. "I know how disappointing that was to you," he begins. Sergeant Gregorius says nothing, and his dark face is as impassive as stone, but Father Captain Soya can read the message behind the silence.
Another 30 seconds and I would have had her.
Soya does not care. He has commanded men and women for over a decade. He has sent braver, more loyal underlings than this to their deaths without allowing remorse or the need for explanation to overwhelm him, so he does not blink now in front of the giant trooper.
"I think the child would have carried out her threat," he says, his tone of voice conveying the message that this was not open to discussion or argument, now or later. "But that's a moot point now. We know where she's going. It may be the one system in this sector of Pax space where no one, not even an ouster swarm, could get in or out unseen and uninterdicted. We are going to have 5 months to prepare for the ship's arrival, and this time we won't be operating alone." Soya pauses to take a breath. "You 3 have worked hard, and this failure in Parvati system is not yours. I'll see to it that you are returned to your unit immediately upon arrival in Renaissance Vector space." Gregorius does not even have to glance at his 2 men before speaking for them.
"Begging the Father Captain's pardon, but if we have a say in it, sir, we choose to stay with you and Raphael until this young'un's safety and... Begging the Father Captain's pardon, but if we have a say in it, sir, we'd choose to stay with you and Raphael until this young'un's safely in the net and on her way to Pachem, sir."
Soya tries not to show his surprise.
Well, we'll see what happens, Sergeant. Renaissance Vector is fleet headquarters for the Navy, and a lot of our bosses will be there. We'll see what happens. Let's get everything tied down. We translate in 25 minutes.
"Sir?"
"Sir?" "Yes, Corporal Key. Will you be hearing confessions before we die this time?"
Soya works again to keep his expression neutral.
"Yes, Corporal. I'll finish the checklist here and be in the wardroom cubby for confession in 10 minutes. "Thank you, sir." "Thank you, sir," says Key with a smile.
"Thank you,"
says Rettig.
"Thank you, Father,"
rumbles Gregorius. Oh, that's right. There's one thing I was remembering about Gregorius that I forgot. That I did remember, and one thing that I forgot. So we may hear Gregorius's voice change once I have confirmation. Soya watches the 3 jump to tie-down activities, shedding their massive combat armor as they go. In that instant, he catches an intuitive glimpse of the future and feels the weight of it on his shoulders. "Lord, give me strength to carry out thy will. In Jesus' name I ask. Amen." Swiveling his heavy couch back to the command panels, Soya begins the final checklist before translation and death. "25. Once, while guiding some duck hunters born on Hyperion into the fens, I asked one of them, an airship pilot who commanded the weekly dirigible run down the Nine Tails from Equus to Aquila, what his job was like. "Piloting an airship," he'd said, "as the ancient line goes, long hours of boredom broken by minutes of sheer panic." This trip was a bit like that.
I don't mean to say that I was bored. Just the interior of the spaceship with its books and old holos and grand piano was interesting enough to keep me from being bored for the next 10 days, not to mention getting to know my traveling companions. But already we'd experienced these long, slow, pleasantly idle periods punctuated by interludes of wild adrenaline rush. I admit that it had been disturbing in Parvati's system to sit out the sight of the vid pickup and watch this child threaten to kill herself, and us, if the Pax ship did not back off. I'd spent 10 months dealing blackjack on Felix, world of the Nine Tails, and had watched a lot of gamblers. This 11-year-old would be one hell of a poker player. Later, when I asked her if she would have carried through on the threat and opened our last pressurized level to space, she only smiled that mischievous smile and made a vague gesture with her right hand, a sort of flicking away, as if she were brushing the thought out of the air. I grew used to that gesture in later months and years. "Well, how did you know that Pax captain's name?" I asked. I expected to hear some revelation about the powers of a proto-messiah, but Aenea only said, "He was waiting at the Sphinx when I stepped out a week ago. I guess I heard someone call his name." I doubted that. If the Father Captain had been at the Sphinx, Pax Army standard procedure would have had him buttoned into combat armor and communicating on secure channels. But why would the child lie? Why am I seeking logic or sanity here? I'd asked myself at the moment. There hasn't been any so far. When Aenea had gone below decks to take a shower after our dramatic departure from Parvati's system, the ship had tried to reassure Bettik and me. "Do not worry, gentlemen. I would not have allowed you to die from decompression." The android and I had exchanged a look. I think that both of us were wondering whether the ship knew what it would have done, or whether the child had some special control over it. As the days of the second leg of the voyage passed, I found myself brooding about the situation and my reaction to it. The main problem, I realized, had been my passivity, almost irrelevancy, during this whole trip. I was 27 years old, an ex-soldier, a man of the world, even if the world was only backwater Hyperion, and here I had let a child deal with the one real emergency we'd faced. I understood why Bettik had been so passive in the situation. He was, after all, conditioned by bioprogramming and centuries of habit to defer to human decisions. But why had I been such a stump? Martin Silenus had saved my life and sent me on this insane quest to protect the girl, to keep her alive and help her get to wherever she had to go. So far, all I had done was fly a carpet and hide behind a piano while the kid dealt with a Pax warship. The four of us, including the ship, talked about that Pax warship during those first few days out from Parvati's space. If Aenea was right, Father Captain de Soya had been on Hyperion during the opening of the tomb, then the If Aenea was right, if Father Captain de Soya had been on Hyperion during the opening of the tomb, then the Pax had found some way to take a shortcut through Hawking space. The implications of that reality were more than sobering. They scared the shit out of me. Aenea did not seem overly worried. The days passed, and we fell into the comfortable, if a bit claustrophobic, shipboard routine. Aenea playing the piano after dinner, all of us grazing the library. Grazing in. Okay, let's try this again. I apologize. I think part of the problem is I've gone from reading The Nightland to reading something that's sane and easy to read. And my brain is like, well, that's a long sentence, but it's actually pretty comprehensible. I must have messed something up. And so I'm like second-guessing myself. All right. The days passed, and we fell into the comfortable, if a bit claustrophobic, shipboard routine. Aenea playing the piano after dinner, all of us grazing in the library, checking the ship's holos and navigation logs for any clue as to where it had taken the console. There were many clues, none definitive. Playing cards in the evening, she was a formidable poker player, and occasionally exercising, which I did by asking the ship to set the containment field to 1.3 G just in the stairwell, and then running up and down the 6 stories worth of spiral steps for 45 minutes. I'm not sure what it did for the rest of my body, but my calves, thighs, and ankles soon looked like they belonged to some Jovian world elephantoid. When Aenea realized that the field could be tailored to small regions of the ship, there was no stopping her. She began sleeping in a bubble of 0G on the fugue deck. She found that the table on the library deck could be morphed into a billiard table, and she insisted on at least 2 games a day, each time under different G loads. One night I heard a noise while reading on the navigation level, went down the stairs to the hollow pit level, and found the hull irised open, the balcony extended without the piano there, and a giant sphere of water, perhaps 8 or 10 meters across, floating between the balcony and the outer containment field. "What the hell?" "It's fun!" came a voice from within the pulsing blob of shifting water. A head with wet hair broke the surface, hanging upside down 2 meters above the floor of the balcony. "Come on in!" cried the girl. "The water's warm!" I leaned away from the apparition, putting my weight on the railing and trying not to think of what would happen if that localized bubble of the field failed for a second. "Has Bettik seen this?" I said. The pale shoulders shrugged. The fractal fireworks were pulsing and folding out beyond the balcony, casting incredible colors and reflections on the sphere of water. The sphere itself was a great blue blob, with lighter patches on the surface and interior where bubbles of air shifted. Actually, it reminded me of photos of old Earth that I had seen. Aenea ducked her head under, was a pale form kicking through the water for a moment, and re-emerged 5 meters up the curved surface. Smaller globules splashed free and curved back to the surface of the larger sphere, herded there by the field differential, I assumed, splashing and sending complex concentric circles rippling across the surface of the water globe. "Come on in," she said again. "I mean it." "I don't have a suit." Aenea floated a second, kicked over onto her stomach, and dived again. When she emerged, head completely upside down from my perspective this time, she said, "Who has a suit? You don't need one." I knew she was not joking, because during her dive I had seen the pale vertebrae pressing against the skin of her back, her ribs, and her still boy-like butt reflecting the fractal light, like 2 small white mushrooms poking up from a pond. All in all, the sight of our 11-year-old Messiah-to-be naked was about as sexually arousing as seeing holoslides of Aunt Mirth's new grandkitties in the tub. "Come on in, Raul," she called again, and dived for the opposite side of the sphere. I hesitated only a second before kicking off my robe and outer clothes. I kept on not only my undershorts, but the long undershirt I often wore as pajamas. For a moment I stood on the balcony, not having the slightest clue as to how to get into the sphere several meters above me. Then I heard, "Jump, dummy!" from somewhere on the upper arc of the blob, and I jumped. The transition to 0G began about 1.5 meters up. The water was damned cold. I pivoted, shouted from the cold, felt everything contractable on my body contract in short order, and began splashing around, trying to keep my head above the curved surface. I was not surprised when Bettik came out on the balcony to see what the shouting was all about. He folded his arms and leaned against the railing, crossing his legs at the ankles. The water's warm," I said. I lied through chattering teeth. "Come on in." The android smiled and shook his head like a patient parent. I shrugged and pivoted and died. It took me a second or two to realize that swimming is much like moving in 0G anyway, that floating in water in 0G is much like ordinary swimming. Either way, the resistance of the water made the experience more swim-like than 0G-like, although there was the added run of coming across an air bubble somewhere inside the sphere and pausing there to catch one's breath before paddling around underwater again. After a moment of cartwheeling disorientation, I came to a bubble, stopped myself before tumbling out into the sphere, and looked directly above me to see Aenea's head and shoulders emerging there. She looked down at me and waved. The skin on her bare chest was goosebumpy from either the cool water or cooler air. "Some fun, eh?" she said, spluttering water out of her face and brushing back her hair with both hands. Her blonde-brown hair looked almost black when wet. I looked at the girl and tried to see her mother in her, the dark-haired Lucian detective. It was no use. I had never seen an image of Braun Lamia, only heard descriptions from the cantos.
The hard part's keeping yourself from flying out of the water when you get to the edge, said Aenea as our bubble shifted and contracted, the wall of water curving around and above us. Race you to the outside.
I do kind of wonder how much resistance surface tension would make on a bubble of 0G water a couple meters wide. It's an interesting idea. Interesting thought. It's great. One thing I gotta give Dan Simmons, he has a phenomenal sense of describing things, both aesthetically, visually, kinesthetically. He's very gifted in that regard. She pivoted and kicked, and I tried to follow, but made the mistake of flailing across the air bubble. My God, I hope that neither Bettik nor the child saw that pathetic spasm of arms and legs, and ended up at the edge of the sphere half a minute behind her. We trod water there. The ship and balcony were out of sight beneath us. The surface of the water curved away and to the left and right. Dropping out of sight like waterfalls on all sides of us, while above us the crimson fractals expanded, exploded, contracted, and expanded again. I wish we could see the stars, I said, and was surprised that I had spoken aloud.
Me too, said Aenea.
Her face was raised to the disturbing light show, and I thought I saw a shadow of sadness flicker across her features.
I'm cold, she said at last.
I could see her clenched jaws now, sense her effort to keep her teeth from chattering.
Next time I tell the ship to build the pool, I'll remind it not to use cold water.
You'd better get out, I said. We swam down and around the curve of the sphere. The balcony seemed to be a wall rising to greet us, its only anomaly the form of Bettik standing sideways from it, holding out a large towel for Aenea.
Close your eyes, she said.
I did, and felt the heavy 0G globules of water splash water strike my face as she flailed her way through the surface tension of the sphere and floated beyond it, even. A second later, I heard the slap of her bare feet as she landed on the balcony. I waited a few more seconds and opened my eyes. Bettik had set the voluminous towel around her, and she was huddled in it, teeth chattering now despite her efforts to stop them.
Be careful, she said. Rotate as soon as you get out of the water, or you'll fall on your head and break your neck.
Thanks, I said, having no intention of leaving the sphere before she and Bettik left the balcony. They did so a moment later, and I paddled out, kicked arms and legs in a wild attempt to turn 180 degrees before gravity reasserted itself, pivoted too far, overcompensated, and landed heavily on my rear end. I pulled down the extra towel that Bettik had thoughtfully left on the railing for me, mopped my face, and said, "Ship, you can collapse the 0G microfield now." I realized my mistake an instant later, but before I could countermand the order, several hundreds of gallons of water collapsed onto the balcony, a massive waterfall of bone-chilling weight crashing down from a great height. If I had been directly under it, it might well have killed me, a mildly ironic end to a great adventure, but since I was sitting a couple of meters from the edge of the deluge, it merely smashed me against the balcony, caught me up in its vortex as it spilled up and over the railing, and threatened to fling me out into space and down past the stern of the ship 15 meters below, down to the bottom of the ellipsoid bubble of the containment field, where I would end up like a drowned insect in an ovoid beaker. I grabbed at the railing and held on while the torrent roared by. "Sorry," said the ship, realizing its own error and reshaping the field around us to contain and collect the deluge. I noticed that none of it had washed through the open doorway into the hollow pit level. When the microfield had lifted the water away in sloshing spheres, I found my sodden towel and walked through the doorway into the ship. As the hull irised shut behind me, the water presumably being returned to its holding tanks before being purified again for our use or as recreation mass, I stopped cold. "Ship?" I demanded. "Yes, Endymion. That wasn't your idea of a practical joke, was it?" Do you mean obeying your order to collapse a zero-G microfield, Endymion? Yeah. I assure you, the consequences were the result of a minor oversight only, Endymion. I do not commit practical jokes. Be assured, I do not suffer from a sense of humor. I said, not totally convinced. Carrying my wet shoes and clothing with me, I squished upstairs to dry off and get dressed. I visited... Oh, one second. Let me get a little water in me here. Dry mouth. I visited a Bettik down in what he called the engine room the next day. The place did have somewhat the sense of an engine room in an ocean-going ship. Warm pipes, obscure but massive dynamo-shaped objects, catwalks, and metal platforms. But A. Bettik showed me how the primary purpose of the space was to interface with the ship's drives and field generators via the space... Oh, I just reread the same line, that's what it is. But A. Bettik showed me how the primary purpose of the space was to interface with the ship's drives and field generators via various StimSim-like connectors. I admit that I've never enjoyed computer-generated realities, and after sampling a few of the virtual views of the ship, I disconnected and sat by A. Bettik's hammock while we talked. He told me about helping to service and rent this ship over the long... Yes, service and rent this ship over the long decades, and how he had begun to believe it would never fly. Excuse me. Wow. He told me about helping to... Let's try this one more once, and then we'll move on. He told me about helping to service and rent this ship over the long decades, and how he had begun to believe it would never fly again. I sensed a relief that the voyage was underway. Had you always planned to go on the trip with whomever the old poet chose to go with the girl? I asked. The android looked steadily at me. For the past century I have harbored the thought, Endymion, but I rarely considered it a potential reality. I thank you for making it so. His gratitude was so sincere that it embarrassed me for a moment. You'd better not thank me until we escape the Pax, I said to change the subject. I suppose they'll be waiting for us in Renaissance Vector space. It seems likely. The blue-skinned man did not seem especially concerned by the prospect. Do you think Aenea's threat of opening the ship to space will work a second time? I said. A. Bettik shook his head. They wish to capture the girl alive, but they will not be taken in by that bluff again. I raised my eyebrows. Do you really think she was bluffing? I had the impression that she was ready to open our level to vacuum. I think not, said A. Bettik. I do not know this young person well, of course, but I had the pleasure of spending some days with her mother and the other pilgrims during their crossing of Hyperion. Lamia was a woman who loved life and respected the lives of others. I believe that Aenea might have carried out the threat if she had been alone, but I do not think that she is capable of choosing to hurt you or me. I had nothing to say to that, so we spoke of other things. The ship, our destination, how strange the web worlds must be after all this time since the fall. If we land on Renaissance Vector, I said, do you plan to leave us there? Leave you? Said A. Bettik, showing surprise for the first time. Why would I leave you there? I made a lame gesture with my hand. Well, I always thought you wanted your freedom and would find it on the first civilized world we landed on. I stopped before I made more of an idiot of myself. My freedom is found by being allowed to come along on this voyage, the android said softly. He smiled. And besides him, Endymion, I could hardly blend in with the populace if I did want to stay on Renaissance Vector. This raised an issue I'd been thinking about. You could change your skin color, I said. The ship's autosurgeon could do that. I stopped again, seeing something subtle in his expression that I did not understand. As you know, Endymion, began A. Bettik, we androids are not programmed like machines, not even set with basic parameters and asymovators. Okay, so he's made a new compound word. Asymotivators. As in Asimov motivators, as in 3 laws safe, as in the 3 laws of robotics. As you know, Endymion,
began A. Bettik. "We androids are not programmed like machines, not even set with basic parameters and asymotivators like the early DNA AIs which evolved into the core intelligences. But certain inhibitions were, strongly urged on us when our instincts were being designed. One, of course, is to obey humans whenever reasonable, and to keep them from coming to harm. This asymotivator is older than robotics or bioengineering, I am told. But another instinct is not to change my skin color." "You're not capable of it?" I asked. "You couldn't do it if our lives depended upon you concealing your blue skin?" "Oh, yes," said A. Bettik. "I am a creature of free will. I could do so, especially if the action was consistent with high-priority asymotivations, such as keeping you and Aenea safe from harm. But my choice would make me uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable."
I nodded, but did not really understand. We spoke of other things. Basically, he's saying, if I'm understanding correctly, he'd essentially have gender dysmorphia. Or at least physical dysmorphia. He would feel wrong. This was the same day that I inventoried the contents of the weapons and EVA lockers on the main airlock level. There was more there than I'd thought upon first inspection, and some of the objects were so archaic that I had to ask the ship their purpose. Most of the things in the EVA locker were obvious enough. Spacesuits and hazardous atmosphere suits, 4 flybikes cleverly folded into their storage niches under the spacesuit closet, heavy-duty hand lamps, camping gear, osmosis masks, and scuba gear with nippers and spear guns, 1 EM flying belt, 3 boxes of tools, 2 well-equipped medkits, 6 sets of night vision and IR goggles, an equal number of lightweight headsets with mic bead communicators and vid cameras, and comlogs. These last items caused me to query the ship. On a world without a datasphere, I had grown up with little use for the things. The comlogs ranged from the antiquated, the thin silver band of jewelry type that was popular several decades ago, to absolutely ancient, massive things the size of a small book. All were capable of being used as communicators, of storing massive amounts of data, of tapping into the local datasphere, and, especially with the older ones, of actually hooking into planetary fatline relays via remote so that the megasphere could be accessed. I held one of the bracelet pieces in my palm. It weighed much less than a gram. Useless. I understood from listening to off-world hunters that there were a few worlds with primitive dataspheres once again. Renaissance Vector was one of them, I thought. But the fatline relays had been useless for almost 3 centuries. The fatline, the common band of FTL communication upon which the hegemony had depended, had been silent since the fall. I started to put the comlog back in its velvet-lined case. "You might find it useful to take with you if you leave me for any period of time," said the ship. I glanced over my shoulder. "Why?" "Information," said the ship. "I would be happy to download the bulk of my basic data logs into one or more of those. You could access it at will." I chewed my lip, trying to imagine any value in having the ship's confused mass of data on my wrist. Then I heard Grandam's voice from my childhood. "Information is always to be treasured, Raul. It is behind only love and honesty in a person's attempt to understand the universe." "Good idea," I said, snapping the thin silver thread around my wrist. "When can you download the databanks?" "I just did," said the ship. I had gone through the weapons locker carefully before we had reached Parvati's space. There had been nothing there which could have slowed a Swiss guardsman for a second. Now I studied the contents of the locker with different purposes in mind. It is odd how old things look. Oh, it helps if you add the last word to that sentence, my man. It is odd how old things look old. The spacesuits and flybikes and hand lamps, almost everything aboard the ship, seemed antiquated, out of style. There were no skin suits, for instance, and the bulk, design, and color of everything seemed like a holo from a history text. But the weapons were a slightly different story. They were old, yes, but very familiar to my eye and hand. The consul had obviously been a hunter. There were 6 shotguns on the rack, well oiled and stored properly. I could have taken any one of them and headed for the fens to bag ducks. They ranged from a petite 310 over and under to a massive 28-gauge double barrel. I chose an ancient but perfectly preserved 16-gauge pump with actual cartridges and set it in the corridor. The rifles and energy weapons were beautiful. The consul must have been a collector, because these specimens were works of art as well as killing devices. Scrollwork on the stocks, blue steel, hand-fitted elements, perfect balance. In the millennium and more since the 20th century, when personal weapons were mass-produced to be incredibly deadly, cheap, and ugly as metal doorstops, some of us, the consul and I among the few, had learned to treasure beautiful handmade or limited production guns. On the rack here were high-caliber hunting rifles, plasma rifles. Not a misnomer. I had learned while in the Home Guard basing training. The plasma cartridges were bolts of sheer energy, of course, when they emerged from the barrel, but the cartridges did benefit from the barrel's rifling before they volatilized. Two elaborately carved laser-based energy rifles. This was a misnomer, an artifact of language rather than design. Not that different from the one M. Herrig had killed Izzy with, and not many days later, a matte black force assault rifle that probably resembled the one Colonel Fedman Kassad had brought to Hyperion 3 centuries ago. There's a lot of commas here. A huge bore plasma weapon that the consul must have used for shooting dinosaurs on some world, and 3 handguns. There were no death wands. I was glad. I hated the damned things. I removed one of the plasma rifles, the force assault weapon, and the handguns for further inspection. The force weapon was ugly, an exception to the consul's collecting scheme, but I saw why it had been useful. The thing was multi-purpose. An 18mm plasma rifle, a variable beam coherent energy weapon, grenade launcher, a beekeeper, beams of high-energy electrons, BHEE, flechette launcher, a wideband blinder, heat-seeking dart flinger. Hell, a force assault weapon could do everything but cook the troopers' meals. And, when in the field, the variable beam, set to low, could usually do that as well. Before entering Parvati's system, I had toyed with greeting any Swiss Guard boarders with the Force weapon, but modern combat suits would have shrugged off everything it could dole out, and, to be honest, I had been afraid it would make the Pack's troopers mad. Now I studied it more carefully. Something this flexible might be useful if we wandered too far from the ship and I had to take on a more primitive foe, say a caveman or a jet fighter or some poor slob equipped as we had been in Hyperion's Home Guard. In the end, I rejected taking it. It was prohibitively heavy if one weren't in an old Force exo-powered combat suit. The thing had no ammunition for the flechette, grenade, or bee settings. Its 18mm pulse cartridges were impossible to find anymore, and to use the energy weapon options, I would have to be near the ship or some other serious power source. I set the assault gun back in place, realizing as I did so that it might well have been the legendary Colonel Kassad's personal weapon. It did not fit the profile of the Kassad. Perhaps he had kept the thing for sentimental reasons. Oh, I think they meant the consul. That would make sense. But there's a goof there. It did not fit the profile of the consul. Perhaps he had kept the thing for sentimental reasons. I asked the ship, but the ship did not remember. Surprise, surprise, I muttered. The handguns were more ancient than the assault gun, but much more promising. Each was a collector's item, but they used cartridge magazines that could still be purchased, at least on Hyperion. I couldn't vouch for the worlds we would visit. The biggest weapon was a 60-caliber Steiner-Ginn full-auto penetrator. It was a serious weapon, but heavy. The cartridge templates weighed almost as much as the handgun, and it was designed to use ammunition at a prodigious rate. I set it back. The other two were more promising. A small, light, eminently portable flechette pistol that might have been the great-granddaddy of the weapon M. Herrig had tried to kill me with. It came with several hundred shiny little needle eggs. The grip magazine held 5 at a time, and each of the eggs held several thousand of the flechettes. It was a good weapon for someone who was not necessarily a good shot. The final handgun amazed me. It was in its own oiled leather holster. I removed the weapon with fingers that were slightly shaking. I knew it only from old books. A .45 caliber semi-automatic handgun, actual cartridges. The kind that came in brass casings, not a magazine template that created them as the gun was fired. Patterned grip, metal sights, blue steel. I turned the weapon over in my hands. This thing could date back more than 1,000 years. I looked in the case in which I had found it. 5 boxes of .45 cartridges, several hundred rounds. I thought that they must be ancient as well, but I found the manufacturer's tag. Lucis. About 3 centuries ago. Hadn't Braun Lamia carried an ancient .45, according to the cantos? Later, when I asked Aenea, the child said that she had never seen her mother with a handgun. Still, it and the flechette pistol seemed like weapons we should have with us. I did not know if the .45 cartridges would still fire, so I carried one out on the balcony, warned the ship that the external field should stop the slug from ricocheting, and squeezed the trigger. Nothing. Then I remembered that these things had a manual safety. I found it, clicked it off, and tried again. My God, it was loud. But the shells still worked. I set the weapon in its holster and clipped the holster to my utility belt. It felt right there. Of course, when the last .45 cartridge had been fired, that would be it forever, unless I could find an antique gun club that manufactured them. I don't plan to have to fire several hundred bullets at anything, I thought wryly at the time. If only I had known. Meeting with the girl and android later, I showed them the shotgun and plasma hunting rifle I'd chosen, the flechette pistol and the .45. If we go wandering through strange places, uninhabited strange places, we should go armed, I said. I offered the flechette pistol to both of them, but they were both refused. Aenea wanted no weapon. The android pointed out that he could not use one against a human being, and he trusted me to be around if a fierce animal was chasing him. I grunted, but set the rifle, shotgun, and flechette pistol aside. I'll wear this, I said, touching the .45. It matches your outfit, Aenea said with a slight smile. There was no last-minute desperate discussion of a plan this time. None of us believed that Aenea's threat of self-destruction would work again if the Pax was waiting. Our most serious discussion of coming events came 2 days before we spun down into the Renaissance system. We had eaten well. Bettik had prepared a fillet of river manta with a light sauce, and we had raided the ship's wine cellar for a fine wine from the Beek's vineyards. And after an hour of music with Aenea on the piano and the android playing a flute he had brought with him, talk turned to the future. "Ship, what can you tell us about Renaissance Vector?" asked the girl. There was that brief pause that I had come to associate with the ship being embarrassed. "I am sorry, Aenea, but other than navigational information and orbital approach maps, which are centuries out of date, I'm afraid I have no information about the world." "I have been there," said Bettik, "also centuries ago, but we have been monitoring radio and television traffic that refers to the planet." "I've heard some of my off-world hunters talk," I said. "Some of the richest are from Renaissance 5. I gestured to the android. "Why don't you start?" He nodded and folded his arms. Renaissance Vector was one of the most important worlds of the hegemony. Extremely Earth-like on the Solmev scale, it was settled by early seed ships and was completely urbanized by the time of the Fall. It was famous for its universities, its medical centers. Most Paulson treatments were administered there for the Webb citizens who could afford it. Its Baroque architecture, especially beautiful in its mountain fortress, Keep Enable, and its industrial output. Most of the Force spacecraft were manufactured there. In fact, this spacecraft must have been built there. It was a product of the Mitsubishi Havchek complex. "Really?" said the ship's voice. "If I knew that, the data must have been lost. How interesting." Aenea and I exchanged worried glances for the 10th time on this voyage. A ship that couldn't remember its past or point of origin did not inspire confidence during the complexities of interstellar flight. Oh well, I thought for the 10th time, it got us in and out of Parvati system all right. Da Vinci is the capital of Renaissance Vector, continued Bettik, although the entire landmass and much of the single large sea are urbanized, so there is little distinction between one urban center and the other. It's a busy Pax world, I added, one of the earliest to join the Pax after the fall. The military is there in spades. Both Renaissance 5 and Renaissance M have orbital and lunar garrisons, as well as bases all over each planet. Oh, Renaissance V, sorry. It's not the 5th. It's Renaissance Vector. Curse me for misremembering.
What's Renaissance M?
Asked Aenea.
Renaissance Minor, said Bettik, the second world from the sun. Renaissance V is the third. Minor is also inhabited, but much less so. It is a largely agricultural world, huge automated farms covering much of the planet, and it feeds Vector. After the fall of the Farcasters, both worlds benefited from this arrangement. Before regularly scheduled interstellar commerce was reinstated by the Pax, the Renaissance system was fairly self-contained. Renaissance Vector manufactured goods. Renaissance Minor provided the food for the 5 billion people on Renaissance Vector.
The other thing that signifies that it's not Renaissance 5 is that it has a period after the V to show that it is a truncated word, or a abbreviation. What is the population of Renaissance V now? I asked.
I believe it is about the same, 5 billion people, give or take a few hundred million, said Bettik. As I said, the Pax arrived early and offered both the cruciform and the birth control regime that goes with it.
You said you'd been there, I said to the android. What's the world like?
Said Bettik with a rueful smile. I was at the Renaissance Vector spaceport for less than 36 hours, while being shipped from Asquith in preparation for our colonizing King William's new land on Hyperion. They did rouse us from cryogenic sleep, but did not allow us to leave the ship. My personal recollections of the world are not extensive.
Are they mostly born-again Christians there?
Asked Aenea. The girl seemed thoughtful and somewhat withdrawn. I noticed that she had been chewing her nails again.
Oh, yes, said Bettik. Almost all 5 billion of them, I'm afraid.
And he wasn't kidding about the heavy Pax military presence, I said. The Pax troopers who trained us in the Hyperion Home Guard staged out of Renaissance V. It's a major garrison world and transshipment point for the whole war against the ousters. Aenea nodded, but still seemed distracted. I decided not to beat around the bush. Why are we going there? I asked. She looked up at me. Her dark eyes were beautiful but remote that moment.
I told you, Raul, I want to see the River Tethys.
I shook my head. The River Tethys was a Farcaster construct, you know. It didn't exist outside the web. Or rather, it existed
Yeah, there we go. Sorry. Moved my mic and it cut out. Hopefully it did not cut out before that. That would be embarrassing. Anyway, that's where we'll call it for today. Monday should be a lock, but it's looking like Friday might be up in the air. We'll figure it out. I'll try and keep people posted on the Discord. No, Discord isn't the ideal way of transmitting this information, but I don't really do the social media things, so that's out. I should probably make my own website I can direct people to, but I'm lazy, and my time is somewhat limited in some ways. So yeah, that's it. We will continue reading this until we are done the book. We will not stop reading the book until it's done. Yep, that's it for now. Happy New Year to everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed. I certainly had fun. It's a lot of fun reading to people. And with that, I'll stay safe. I'll stay sane. Well, I won't. You all can stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. And I will see you all next time. Monday, January, whatever day it is. The 4th, 5th?